And this is Mike Fader on Sirius XM Left. What is it? 127, right? 127. I'm going to get it right. It's only been like 3 years now. All right, Mike Fader here. If you want to get in touch with me about anything, we have some really good guests tonight, and we're going to have discussions about all the stuff that's going on in the world. Obviously, we need about 25 hours to do that, but we'll jam it all in. If you want to get in touch with me about anything you hear on the show, go to my website. Also, you can check out some new entries I just put on the website. It's Fader Files, FederFiles.com, FaderFiles.com. Give you a doorway into all kinds of other stuff I do, books I've written, other kinds of radio stuff. And one other thing is we have an ongoing discussion about politics, mostly domestic politics and alternative politics in this country, which is a pretty good discussion that's sort of ongoing at a place called, it's a Facebook page called Occupied Territory. We're not talking about the Middle East here. We're talking about the United States. And it's just Google Facebook and Occupied Territory. You can join that conversation. So those two places to check out. Now, a lot of you watched the conventions down in Tampa, and you saw the circus that was put on for our enjoyment. But one thing you didn't see was not one split second anywhere of anybody protesting. You would never know there was anybody protesting down there. And there weren't many, but there were some. And they were in Tampa and also partially in Charlotte, designated to what they call protest zones, or special zones for protest. Translated, that means that they're far away from any cameras, so that the news would never see them. And of course, the news won't cover it anyhow, being the corporate news media. So with that kind of collusion in mind, you never would know that anybody was upset about what was going on at the convention. You might go back as far as I do, since I'm an old guy, back to 1968, when people were allowed to protest near where there was a convention, or even right across the street or a block away. And you saw what happened in 1968. The whole world saw it on television. Well, since that time, both parties have been very careful with their conventions, as is the government in general, of keeping anybody who protests a government official, especially a high government official, far away so that they can't be seen. And they put them in special zones. Now, this, of course, violates our basic principles, and how could we ever have a democracy? So, meanwhile, we've got somebody on here tonight who's a guest who's written a book all about this, and he's an expert on it, and his name is Ronald Krotoszynski, and he is a professor at the University of Alabama Law School. Hiya.
Hi, good to be with you, Mike.
Can't sum up everything, but I just want to get people an idea of what we're going to talk about. Let me introduce you to people, and we'll move on from there. Ronald Krotoszynski, Jr. is John S. Stone Chair and Professor of Law at the University of Alabama Law School in Tuscaloosa. He is the author also of The First Amendment and Cross-Cultural Perspective, a comparative legal analysis of the freedom of speech. And his new book is called Reclaiming the Petition Clause. Seditious libel, offensive protest, that's in quotes, offensive protest, and the right to petition the government for a redress of grievances. So it's Reclaiming the Petition Clause. And Professor Krotoszynski, Ronald, can I call you Ronald?
Yes, please.
Okay. Wrote an op-ed piece in the Times, I think it was a couple of months ago, about this. And you're all aware of the fact that nobody is allowed to protest but a lot of this stuff started back, well, I'm sure that our guest can tell us more, but it started back in the 2000s with Bush, when we all became aware of the fact that you couldn't get anywhere near the president when he was campaigning or giving a speech. And it's the same way now. Generally, you never see things like that unless somebody slips in unnoticed, and then you'll read a story about somebody being dragged out. So, where exactly to start on this? But the question here is, does the First Amendment protect the speaker's interest in reaching a particular audience if the expressive activity occurs in a traditional public forum? I got that from a précis, right?
I think that's a great way of framing it. Okay. And, I hope the answer is yes, although, the Supreme Court to date really hasn't given any weight whatsoever to the interest of a group of protesters or dissenters in communicating in real time a message, even when the audience can consists of elected officials who have some measure of responsibility for the policy that they wish to protest. And the lower federal courts have addressed this issue in the context of presidential appearances and the national nominating conventions, 3 circuits, the 1st, 9th, and 10th, and they've all held that the right to speak and assemble and associate on public property does not encompass an interest in reaching a particular audience, whether that's delegates to a political convention or whether it's the president or vice president of the United States. And it's kind of disconcerting because if we're going to have popular input into the way government works, into the government's policies, there has to be some way for people to communicate effectively, not with a staffer or maybe a computer algorithm that just spits out a response to your email, but to actually communicate in real time, ideally with the mediation of the press, showing this sort of direct confrontation and presenting the alternative viewpoint. But of course, as you said in your lead-in, politicians detest this. They view it as a kind of PR theft, and both politicians on the right and left really would like nothing better than to banish dissenters as far away as possible from their events and from the media who were there to cover these events.
Well, that's it's interesting you mentioned the word theft. It's almost as if they have they feel like they have copyright protection on political expression.
I think
as if you're
right.
violating their trademarks,
Well, there are countries that roll that way, right? I mean, think about North Korea under pick your dictator of the last 3, and they have these wonderfully staged rallies in sports arenas, and they all have cards, and they flip a card, and it's a jet fighter, and they flip the card again, and it's a kitten, and they flip a card again, and it's a Kim Il Jong or Kim Jong Il, and that sort of staged political theater, which is part of the political life of a lot of oppressed peoples, is something that you'd like to think is just fundamentally inconsistent with the way our democracy works, going all the way back to the Spear of '76. But
I'd say we were on the, if there's a road to it, like a continuum, a long road to end up in a place like that, we're definitely on that road right now, and it would be a good idea if we could pull back. Maybe we could start off with definition of terms. When you say reclaiming the petition clause, what is the petition clause?
All right. The First Amendment, which is applied to the states through the 14th Amendment, provides for rights of speech, press, assembly, and petition. And the clause says in part that the right of the people peaceably to assemble and to petition the government for redress of grievances shall not be abridged. And in fact, when Madison first introduced, James Madison, that is the father of the Bill of Rights and one of the principal drafters of the Constitution, when he introduced this amendment in the House of Representatives in 1789, the clause that had speech and press was actually independent of the clause that had assembly and petition. And there's a good historical reason for this. In Britain, one way of controlling the people was to prohibit meetings that weren't called by the government or by the gentry, so that ordinary people, who didn't have the right to vote, by the way, England didn't have universal suffrage for everyone until 1928, in fact, couldn't meet. And you can't really get a petition or an organized effort to lobby the government together if you can't meet. And so assembly was something people would do antecedent to petitioning. You would assemble, you would discuss,
right.
You would come up with a program, then you would seek support for that program, and then ultimately present your petition to the government. And in the classic form of petitioning, and again, if we're going to be originalists like Justices Thomas and Scalia.
Well, why not? If they can do it, we can do it.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think, and in this case, it actually would have the effect of advancing civil liberties. An originalist understanding of the petition right, going back to the time of Madison and even before, involved a right to assemble and petition, a right to deliver your petition to the government in person if you wanted to, and also an obligation on the part of the government to respond to the petition. That doesn't mean you get what you ask for. The government could say, we're busy, we don't care, we disagree, but there was a right essentially to engage, access, and actually receive a response from the government. And in fact, a lot of lawmaking in the colonial era, say in places like Virginia and Massachusetts, was initiated not through a bill written by a member of the House of Burgesses or the state Senate, but was initiated through petitions brought to members by constituents and then put before the body, and the body would consider an act of the petition. I know that sounds radical, right?
Socialism.
The Senate and having them actually, receive and respond to your request. It's almost laughable. Ironically, New Zealand, of all places, I gave a talk to a faculty in Canada, and a New Zealander was in the audience, and he's like, well, this doesn't sound so strange to me. And I said, well, you're kidding. And he said, no, in New Zealand we have an active petitioning culture, and ordinary people will send petitions to the New Zealand Parliament. They have a unicameral legislature called the House of Representatives. They will receive the petition. They will refer it to a committee of jurisdiction, a standing committee of their house, and you'll get an answer. And I was very skeptical, but I actually looked into it, and it's true.
It actually functions that way in practice?
Yeah, and they don't even bury the petitions. That's the other thing that's wild. In other words, we've become so degraded, right, in our expectations of our ability to engage our government, that the notion that a state legislature or a city council, let alone Congress, would receive petitions from ordinary people, put them up on a website, promote them, invite the people who wrote the petition to file supporting materials or even to appear in person to testify, and then as a body give an answer, unthinkable, right? Even for a state legislature in a place like Alabama or Colorado. But in New Zealand, which has a population of about 4 million, they receive these petitions, and if you had a petition, say, on, there was one that I read that I thought was interesting, they were seeking a ban on mercury dental fillings, on the theory that mercury was dangerous in your mouth. And it was referred to the Committee on Health. The Committee on Health took testimony from the petitioners and from the Dental Association and from several medical schools. They concluded that the evidence against mercury fillings was ambiguous, and their recommendation was that the Ministry of Health monitor the current data and science on the safety of mercury fillings.
Well, you can only just sit back in amazement when you hear that. When you talk about all the talk about, Obama at the convention saying, finally he went all the way over the line, says it's not me who does all this, it's you, right? He's telling us we have the power to change things, when in fact, it appears as if we really don't. The kind of representation you're talking about, the first thought that pops up in my mind, you bring up New Zealand, is look how few people live there. What if they had 400 million people?
Well, it would certainly be harder, and I actually don't advocate. I'm willing to be realistic, and the idea that we would expect our House or Senate or the President or Cabinet Department to receive and respond in a serious way to every request they receive is not realistic. But, even if the New Zealand model wouldn't work for the federal government, I don't know why the notion that you can at least communicate with government officials in real time through what I would call hybrid petitioning shouldn't be something that we recognize. So say the president is coming to town, whether it's W or whether it's President Obama, and you want to stand on a street or sidewalk or in a park that abuts the motorcade route, and you want to wave signs that the president might actually see. So you're engaging in speech and assembly and association, and you're using a traditional public forum for that. But it's not any sort of speech or assembly. It has a petitioning cast. So say you want the troops out of Afghanistan, so you have signs saying, end the war now. You can write whitehouse.gov, but good luck in terms of actually signaling to the president himself or to a member of Congress or fill in the blank that you want the war ended now. On the other hand, if you wave on the side of the road as the president waves at you from his limo and you're waving a sign saying end the war now, you actually succeeded in communicating that message. Now, that may not change the world, but in terms of actually having a democratic feedback loop where ordinary people can communicate their views to those who hold the reins of government power, it could be and should be, I think, and traditionally has been, if you go back in time, a regular modality of democratic politics. In fact, a lot of reform efforts. So the classic form of petitioning is a kind of legislative proceeding, and you and I both discussed that, and it's kind of unrealistic. I will stipulate to that. But if you go forward in time, into the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, petitioning ceased to be kind of a legislative proceeding and became a means of mass organization aimed at moving public opinion in a way that would induce Congress to enact some sort of reform.
Well,
voting rights.
Let's go back a little bit too. We got one thing defined, which obviously is the petition clause, part of the First Amendment, which is honored barely in the breach, right now. But what's seditious libel?
In fact, going back to our own history, I'll just stick with the U.S. In 1798, under the Adams administration, the Federalist administration controlled the presidency in both houses of Congress. They passed two laws called the Alien and Sedition Acts. And the Sedition Act basically made it a crime to criticize the government or to bring the government or its officers into disrepute. They were very clever, these Federalists, too. It was a crime to bring Congress or the president into disrepute. And in theory, the speech had to be false, but in practice, the falsity requirement of the statute was largely ignored by the trial judges who presided over sedition trials.
So that any criticism at all was...
Yes.
Really? What was the cause for that? I mean, what was the reason for that? Did something happen?
Well, they wanted to shut. Well, the problem was, do we support France or do we support England? And the question was, should U.S. foreign policy tilt one way or the other? And Adams tilted toward England and away from France, and those, including Jeffersonian Republicans who thought France was our more natural and historical ally, didn't like this foreign policy. And so part of it was just a foreign policy dispute as to whether we should align more closely with the French government or with the English government. And it's interesting, too, because the Federalists excluded specifically one federal office from criticism. That was the vice presidency. And I don't know if you remember this, but under the original Constitution, the person who got the most electoral votes became president, and the runner-up became vice president.
Right, that much I recall from the early...
And so Adams's vice president was actually Thomas Jefferson. So if you wanted to lie about Thomas Jefferson and bring Thomas Jefferson into repute, knock yourself out. The other thing that was interesting about this law is that it went out of effect, I want to say March 20th, 1801. It was literally the day before the new administration, if there was a new administration, would come into office. So that if Jefferson were elected in 1800, the sedition law would not protect him. And the Federalists had a theory back of this, and it was, we are elected by the people. We have a mandate from the people to work their will. And if you're allowed to criticize us and bring us into disrepute and make people lack confidence in us, then we won't be able to work the people's will. So for the good of the people, we must be protected from criticism so that we can serve as the agent of those who sent us to Washington to work their will.
Let us go over what you just said, all right, in terms of logic, reason, and democracy, right? So for the good of the government has to operate efficiently, and they have to function in the world, and they know things you don't know, and they can't be hampered in this by every citizen or group of citizens that wants to intrude their opinion. They have to operate effectively, so they can't be bothered all the time with this kinds of obstructionist behavior from citizens, from mere citizens. So they pass a law. I mean, basically, they had to pass a law, and it had to be signed by the president. So you're saying that almost just several years into our new democratic republic here, they passed one of the most blanket laws against expressing yourself directly against the First Amendment. Was there any kind of case brought? Was there anything complained about legally here?
Yes, and actually it's worse than that, because the Adams administration and the Attorney General ordered prosecutions of the opposition press. And at that time, there were maybe 5 or 6 Democratic, Republican, well, I'll just say Democratic or Jeffersonian papers to make it easier. And they literally brought cases against every editor of a major Jeffersonian paper, and they were able to shut down, they jailed them. They indicted them, they tried them, they convicted them, and they jailed them. So that of 5 opposition presses, only 1 was operating by the time you get to the election of 1800. It was a concerted, deliberate effort to silence the opposition, not merely in terms of street protests or community organizing, but in terms of the opposition press, in hopes of holding the reins of power for another 4 years. I mean, there wasn't much subtle about this. And there was one exception. Petitioning actually was an exception to the rule of seditious libel, both under the Sedition Act of 1798 and also in the common law in the UK practice.
So if I was a citizen alive then, and I wanted to not be accused of violating this law, what would I do?
You could file a petition to Congress saying, make nice with France, please stop blindly supporting the English. And if you file that in respectful language to the House or the Senate or the Secretary of State or to the President, you would not be subject to indictment and punishment. But if you wrote a letter to the editor, you wrote a pamphlet and distributed that, you had leaflets, the only way of essentially criticizing the government without running a risk of criminal prosecution was through the petitioning process.
But if you were the editor, if I was the editor of a newspaper and I wrote very strong, aggressive editorials and caused my reporters to unearth stories going against the administration's policy, we could get locked up?
Correct. You'd be indicted, tried, and put in jail. Yeah.
Unbelievable.
Now, I do have some good news on that. In 1964, in the New York Times v. Sullivan case, the Supreme Court hearkened. And the question was, if you make a mistake of fact in good faith and you're the press, should you be liable to bankrupting damages? And the Supreme Court wisely said no. So long as you don't make a false statement of fact with malice aforethought, and that's a legal term of art that means either with actual knowledge of falsity or with reckless indifference to truth or falsity, you cannot be prosecuted when the object of the speech is a public official, and that's been extended to include a public figure or regarding a matter of public concern. And the court looks back to the Alien and Sedition Acts, and the Sedition Act in particular, and says this is fundamentally inconsistent with a meaningful commitment to democracy. government officials can go after individual citizens, they can criticize individual citizens, and there has to be an even playing field. Citizens have to have the right to criticize back. And so in 1964, the Supreme Court, in a very overwhelming majority, squarely rejected the Sedition Act and the whole theory of seditious libel.
Well, how did it finally get overturned?
Well, it expired. The actual act expired when in March of 1801 it expired of its own force, and the Jeffersonians were not inclined. They actually were intellectually consistent and honest, and they did not try to renew the Sedition Act with respect to the now opposition Federalists. So the Jeffersonians were true to their stated position that free speech was a fundamental precept of democratic self-government, including the right to criticize the government in a way that made it harder for the government to operate.
Now, I'm just looking over the. I think it's the preface to the. Was it UCLA Law Review?
I published a shorter version of this argument, yes, in the UCLA Law Review.
Okay, now I'm looking that over, and at least the preface to it. And there's other reasons why, of course, and you think of automatically as security reasons. After all, assassinations, attacks on presidents, and other government officials in this country. But here it constantly uses the word. Let's see. It posits instead that judges, this is the article, have wrongly permitted local, state, and federal officials to equate the government's dignity interests with its national security interests. Dignity means what here? I mean, who is worried about their dignity, and why does that need to be protected against the public?
Well, it's the notion that if you're publicly contradicted and somebody makes a better argument than you're making, that's embarrassing. And so it's really a politician's interest in avoiding embarrassment. A good example would be in the late 60s, during the final years of LBJ's presidency. He essentially ceased giving major speeches in public venues.
Right.
Because there would be huge protests against the Vietnam War, and the media coverage was far more likely to focus on the protests in Vietnam than on some aspect of LBJ's Great Society program.
So people offended his dignity.
Yes, the notion of seditious libel, and again, I mentioned the Federalist theory. The idea is that there has to be respect and high regard for the government, so that the government can work the will of the people. And since they have a democratic mandate, they have a right to sort of do their best during the term of office. And then, if you don't like what they do, you have elections. You can turn them out of office, but you can't criticize them to the point that they're unable to be effective in working the will of the people. The Federalists and John Adams would have said that's anti-democratic.
Well, but that throws the whole First Amendment right out the window, clearly, right?
Okay. There was a group who took the view, a very minimalist view of the First Amendment.
Oh, okay.
And there's this Blackstone view of free speech.
Mm-hmm.
It would mean only two things, and two things only. No licensing of the press and no prior restraint, meaning that you couldn't be punished before you spoke or prevented from speaking or printing, but once you spoke or printed, all bets were off.
Oh, I see.
So there are some folks who are in Congress who took the view that the First Amendment and the Free Speech Clause and the Press Clause meant only no prior restraints and no licensure of the press. But that's not Madison's view. That's not Jefferson's view. I don't think it's the better view. I think the better view is the one you're articulating, which is the First Amendment was established to create a sphere of individual autonomy and empowerment, not only for political matters, but also regarding matters of art, literature, science. The government is not permitted to declare truth, whether it relates to politics, literature, art, science,
But there are very few, or almost only a couple of real legal ways that you can change the government in this country, and they're becoming increasingly less effective. For instance, voting. I don't want to get into a whole speech about voting, but I would guess that it's probably less effective at this moment than it's ever been before, except when you go back to places where, like, the state legislatures appointed, senators and things like that. But in a modern era, right? I mean, basically your vote is becoming less important all the time because people don't represent you and don't listen to you anymore.
Well, so redistricting too. I mean, most House districts are safe. Mm-hmm. So, a member does not really have to listen to their constituents because it's been drawn in a way that virtually assures their reelection unless they do something, utterly crazy.
Well, unless until we got to the Tea Party, which is having civil wars within parties.
Right, you're not conservative enough.
Yeah.
Lugar, for example, who I didn't realize was a liberal until very recently.
Well, so here we have a situation here where there's only two ways that really you can do anything about what, or you could express yourself in any way about what the government's doing and hopefully influence them, and that is A, voting, and B, expressing your opinion, either individually or en masse, right? And if they're going to restrict people's ability, this is what your whole book is about, to do this because it interferes with the government's ability to function. Now, it's gone so much further than that. It's not just first of all, I don't agree with that anyhow. If the government is criticized all the time, it shouldn't necessarily stop their ability to function. I mean, maybe we're dealing with a time back in those days when people took offense and even fought duels about their honor, right? Maybe they don't really think that way anymore because now it's not the same thing.
Well, and I don't think honestly, I don't think the Federalists really believe their own arguments. I think they were simply trying to make it easier to win re-election by minimizing or simply silencing the opposition press and public supporters of the opposition party, the Jeffersonians. They laid out a theory, a justification, but I really think it was a fig leaf. I think if you got a few beers into John Adams and said, "John, really?" I think John Adams would have admitted that it was a fairly crass political move. The public statements are to the contrary, but it was just too much like the sort of stuff that was done by the royal governments in the pre-revolutionary period in terms of complaints about taxation or representation or local government and local authority.
Well, I mean,
the generation that went through that. So, I mean, they lived through a regime that didn't tolerate fair criticism.
Well, yeah. I mean, that's why there was a revolution in the first place, right? I mean, I read the Declaration of Independence. It says, we complained and complained and complained in the legal, channels, and we wrote petitions and we wrote to the king, and he ignored us.
That's correct. In fact,
so we had a revolution.
There's actually that brings back petition as well. There was something called the Olive Branch petition that was sent over 2 copies, separate ships. Bad things could happen to ships, so they sent 2 copies. They couldn't agree in 1775 in the Continental Congress to just declare independence. They agreed instead to send a detailed petition for redress of grievances to George III. And in fact, the U.S. envoys from the Continental Congress arrived. They attempted to present the petition to King George. He would not receive it on the throne. Instead, he had his Secretary of State receive it. And so the underling took it, the delegates left, and nothing happened. And someone then asked the underling, well, what happened with our petition? And the formal response was the king, having not received it seated upon the throne, is not going to answer it. And so
that's a good one.
So the petition was sort of ignored on a technicality, but it demonstrates that in the classic era of petitioning, not only did you have generally a right to individual presentation of it, but in some sense, as a technical matter, it was essential to present it in person in order to have a right to an answer. In fact, even going back further, in 1664, Parliament passed the Tumultuous Petition Act, and it prohibited more than 10 people from coming to Westminster to deliver a petition. Of course, you see the implication of that.
Sure.
Up to 10 people could go to Westminster to hand a petition to a member of Parliament in person in hopes that they would bring it forward. And so petitioning really does, in its classic form, in its original understanding form, involve a right of ordinary people to access and engage their government. That's something I think that ought to be relevant to the matters that we're discussing in terms of the marginalization, maybe banishment is even the right word, of protest.
Oh, sure. But let's bring it forward, and set it in the modern age. I mean, you start off talking about the Democratic Convention in 2004 in Boston, and there was it eventually wound up, as a federal court case. And, the Democrats, along with the cooperation of the city of Boston, I mean, think of Occupy and what goes on here or what happened in Tampa and Charlotte. They designated an area for protest very far away, really, in terms of visibility by the media or anybody's ability to even see a politician or have a politician see them. And they called it a DZ. What was it called? A demonstration zone, I guess?
That's correct. It was more of like a prison camp.
Well, here, let me, since you mentioned it, let me read what the judge said. And this is Judge Douglas Woodlock, Massachusetts District Judge. And this is what's extraordinary, and you can talk about this. He heard the First Amendment challenge to this speech restriction, which is absurd. And he wrote, here is a written description. I think the judge wrote this. A written description, he said, cannot begin to convey the ambience of the DZ site. I think this is from the judge. At least 2/3 of the DZ lies under unused Green Line tracks, which is the tram train line. The tracks create a space redolent of the sensibility conveyed in Piranesi's etchings. Well, he must have been a pretty learned judge. Published as fanciful images of prisons. It is a grim, mean, and oppressive space whose ominous roof is supported by a forest of girders that obstruct sight lines throughout. So not only do they put these people in this place, which looks like a prison, they actually are treating them, if the world sees them, if anybody put a camera on them anyhow, as if they were prisoners, as if there was something wrong with them per se, because they were locked up. Now, so clearly, this is what they thought in 2004, and this is the Democrats, of protesters, and this is where they stuck them. And then the judge went ahead, and after he said it was like a prison, he went ahead and approved what the city of Boston did, right?
That's right. And then a panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit affirmed the district judge's ruling, saying that that satisfied completely the imperatives of the First Amendment with respect to protests proximate to the convention. That's
proximate. Right. Oh, man. So, and you're saying that other district courts have basically gone along with this, right?
Yes. In fact, the Ninth Circuit, in a case called Minotti involving the WTO protests, essentially said
that's in Seattle, right?
Yes, and they put out an emergency order. Mayor Schell put out an emergency order after there was rioting, and obviously rioting is a bad thing. But under the emergency order, anyone who had any anti-WTO stickers, say you had a button on with like WTO with a red slash mark across it, you would not be allowed in the inner core of Seattle. But if you just had a Starbucks T-shirt, you're good to go. So the protesters were, the demonstrators were defined as those expressing in any visible or audible way anti-WTO messages, and they were categorically excluded from the downtown core of Seattle. Anyone who didn't have such a message was not considered a demonstrator or protester and was free to go to Starbucks or go to work or walk by the convention center. And another case out of the 10th Circuit, NATO was meeting. Citizens for Peace and Space is the name of this case. And 6 people wanted to have a table with a nuclear disarmament message. So it was going to be a fixed-point vigil. They wanted to hand out pamphlets about the evils of nuclear weapons.
Well, first of all, they don't sound very dangerous and not too offensive to anybody's dignity, but go ahead.
Right, and so this is the meeting's at the Broadmoor, which is a huge luxury hotel in Colorado Springs.
Yeah.
There are literally hundreds, if not thousands, of delegates, guests, media. They closed the entire area, so there's a protest-free zone declared anywhere within a half mile of the Broadmoor. And these people just want to have a little table with 6 people. You could screen them. You could put them through TSA strip search machines. You could have a policeman, standing over each one's shoulder. But the government's claim is that they have no residual ability to screen even 6 protesters.
Oh, please.
No, the court buys it. They say security is a problem. These 6 protesters could, be suicide bombers. And so, and also here's the key. Speech and assembly don't give you any right to access an audience consisting of the Secretary of Defense and other defense ministers who have...
The court said that?
Yeah, well, and it's true. The Supreme Court itself has generally not recognized a right to interact with a particular audience. That's really the reason that I laid hold of the petition clause as a hook, because the court really hasn't addressed at all in a serious way what the imperatives of the petition clause are with respect to access to the government.
Well, there's something else, too, which is astounding when you read it. You said in the Ninth Circuit case, it said the Ninth Circuit even seemed to endorse the city's concerns. This is the WTO protest. That the protest might adversely affect the positive public relations benefits that might otherwise be garnered from hosting such a prestigious international group. So the court was actually placing, I'm just glad to see it come out nakedly, right, like this. They're placing business interests above the right to free speech.
Yes, the Standard Chamber of Commerce concerns come to Seattle. It's a lovely place to do business, or hold your conference in Seattle. We'll keep the gnarly protesters at bay.
This is what happened. This is what happens like in the Olympics going back like 40, 50 years already. Cities all over the world, quote unquote, clean up neighborhoods. Right. So, and in London, unless you couldn't even get into the stadium unless you're wearing the right brand, and they clean up neighborhoods where they lock up people who are indigent or poor or living on the margins. They just clean these people. They lock them up or they ship them off to some other place. Basically, everybody is airbrushing democracy. Right. Well,
it seems as if the amount of public space available for collective protest is getting smaller and smaller and smaller. It's disconcerting. Think about the civil rights movement. Think about the 63 March on Washington and the I Have a Dream speech. There's actually a D.C. Circuit opinion that declares the Jefferson Memorial is not a public forum. Some people went to celebrate Jefferson by dancing there at midnight. They were told to stop dancing, that they were supposed to be respectful, and that it was not they couldn't engage in speech activity, including dancing, to celebrate.
So it's disrespectful to Jefferson.
I guess that's it.
Well, that's an irony,
sacred,
right?
Yeah, it's almost like it's a sacred space, and the deity Jefferson will strike you down or something if you dance below his statue.
But that point you make about the civil rights thing is so telling. I mean, after all, if they couldn't have marched, why don't you describe that a little bit? If they didn't have that march, Martin Luther King and his associates and other people didn't have that march, and the public didn't see it, and that was clearly petitioning public officials, right?
Exactly, and think of those images of the Lincoln Memorial and the thousands upon thousands of people, African American, white, Native American, Asian, Latino, this rainbow coalition of people who were demanding that the country do something to address a kind of apartheid in the South. And as I understand this D.C. Circuit opinion, if the federal government wanted to declare the Lincoln Memorial a non-public forum and close it to all speech activity, it'd be free to do so. Period, full stop. If it didn't want to permit protests, it wouldn't have to by just declaring the Lincoln Memorial as a place for solitary and individual reflection about our great leader during the Civil War. It's frightening. And
the Civil Rights March, and then all those anti-war protests.
Or Selma to Montgomery. I mean, the whole Selma to Montgomery March, which took over a U.S. highway, the main highway in that part of Alabama for a 3-day period, was part and parcel of an effort to petition Alabama's governor for respect for voting and civil rights for African American citizens. The plan that was submitted to the district court, the opinion is reported as Williams v. Wallace. Hosea Williams was the lead plaintiff, and Wallace was George Corley Wallace, the governor of Alabama. At the conclusion of the rally in downtown Montgomery, a delegation of the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, was going to go to the governor's office in the state capitol and present the governor with a petition signed by thousands of Alabamians.
As they have a right to do in our Constitution,
well,
correct?
That's what it says.
Yes.
And that's historically, again, and if you take a very originalist point of view, whatever the petition clause means, it means you have a right to take a piece of paper with signatures to a government official and to communicate that message to the government official.
But a federal court could easily have said, well, poor Governor Wallace and his dignity and security concerns, you can't use his highway and you can't approach the governor, so forget about your civil rights.
Right, send him a letter, mail it, UPS, FedEx him, send it to FedEx. Well, actually, and if you think about the security rationale, okay, so the key to these decisions out of the First Circuit with the Boston
security,
the key to this is security, and the government, by the way, never actually proffers a credible actual threat. You get an FBI agent or Secret Service agent who appears at trial and says a car bomber, a suicide bomber, and the ACLU or the lawyers representing the would-be protesters say, well, do you have any actual evidence of that? And they're like, well, no, but it essentially boils down to there could be trouble.
There could be trouble, so then there'd be no protests. Because there could be trouble. But we're living in a homeland security state, which is repeating this over and over and over again, hundreds of times. The Occupy movement, the conventions. I mean, you know that the Department of Homeland Security gave $50 million each to each of these two cities.
Security, that's right.
For security. And then they move these places. And, of course, the media cooperates. I mean, I don't want to get into a whole speech about the media. But the big media cooperates because they're all hooked in at the top. They're not going to show you these demonstrations. So it's kind of a vicious cycle.
Well, they make it impossible for the journalists. So you have a secure zone, right? Where
sure.
You go through a metal detector and you get wand in your car. You have, in fact, multiple layers in Tampa and Charlotte to get anywhere near the media center and the convention hall. So you go through that phalanx of security. And, of course, the designated protest area is a half mile away. So even if a journalist, in good faith, thought, well, let me go see what's going on at the protest zone, they'd have to leave the secure zone, and they might well not even be able to get back in time to cover the main speeches. So by removing all, and I'm not crazy. I'm not arguing that 10,000 people should be allowed to encircle the Tampa arena where the meeting's going on. But
no, it sounds like a good idea to me. We did it in 1967 at the Pentagon.
But 10 people, 100 people. If you think about President Obama's acceptance speech in Denver in 2008 in the state, they literally screened 70,000 guests plus all the technical and support people plus the journalists, and they had they claimed no residual authority or ability to screen 10, 100. I don't know. Give me 5. Give me 5 protesters drawn at random who could have a fixed point protest, proximate to the venue.
Sounds like the Bible, Abraham arguing with God, Can you find?
But it's clearly pretextual, and I think your point about the media is correct too. I mean, when the Presidential Advance Manual for George W. Bush.
Oh yeah. I want to chat. That was the next question I was going to ask you. The people don't know about this, but explain what this manual is.
It's amazing. It's a guide that's provided by the Office of White House Advance, and it basically is a blueprint for how local organizers of presidential appearances and vice presidential appearances are supposed to sort of handle things and organize things. And the Obama administration's Office of Advance has not released. We don't know what the Obama administration is doing, but we do have the Bush administration, not the Poppy Bush, but the W. Bush manual, and it says
it's heavily redacted, though. Right?
It is heavily redacted, but there's enough there to be troubling because it says essentially that anyone who wishes to protest the president or his policies represents a security threat if that person is within sight or hearing of the president or the journalists covering the president.
Unbelievable.
And it even says that rally teams should be organized and that they should come up with sheets and posters and try to block visual access between the presidential event and the media platform.
Let me pin this down, and I'm going to, according to, and I'm reading from the article, I guess quoting from your book here. And by the way, if you just tuned in, we are talking to Ronald Krotoszynski, who is a law professor at the University of Alabama, and his new book is called Reclaiming the Petition Clause, Seditious Libel, Offensive Protest, and the Right to Petition the Government for a Redress of Grievances. This is from the government manual. Secret Service, they asked the local police department to designate a protest area where demonstrators can be placed, preferably not in view of the event site or motorcade route. And here, and this is what you were just talking about, another tactic for dealing with demonstrators. This is from the president, right? Our president, advocated in the recently released and heavily redacted Presidential Advance Manual, is the formation of rally squads, small groups of presidential supporters who spread favorable messages using large handheld signs, placards, or perhaps a long sheet banner, and they're instructed to show up wherever there might be demonstrators, if there are any more in this country. And I don't understand. The government, our government, the people we voted for of the United States, we pay taxes, they have a manual which tells local governments, cities, to recruit rally squads?
Right, and again, this is plainly viewpoint-based. So if you have a T-shirt that has "I heart Obama" or "I heart Bush," you're unmolested. You're free to drink your latte on the sidewalk and wave at the president's motorcade. If you have a slash mark over, W or Obama, you're a protester and you're a security threat. And if you don't move to the designated protest area, which is inevitably, a half mile, a mile away at some,
where no one will ever see,
or, industrial site.
Nobody will ever see or hear you.
Right, but if you don't move, you're arrested for failing to obey a valid police order. And, I hate to say this because you'd like to think that some of these excesses reflected kind of an Addington, Cheney, dark view of sort of human nature. And
I guess not.
But no, in fact, you mentioned Occupy in Midtown Manhattan. Occupy tried to protest a presidential fundraiser, and the New York Police Department rounded them up, forced them into an alley at some distance from the event, so they were unable to communicate with people going to the fundraiser or with the president. And some media reps from Village Voice and Mother Jones wanted to go talk to the Occupy people, and the police denied the journalists access, telling them they were in a frozen zone. And at a presidential appearance in Austin, Texas, at a gymnasium on the UT Austin campus, again, there were some protesters. I don't recall if they were Occupy or not. They just wanted to peacefully protest outside the venue where the event was going to go on. They were told that they were a security threat. They had to move to the designated protest area. They refused, and they were arrested. So I'd like to say that these policies, went away with the 2008 election, but they haven't. And that's really what's quite depressing, so that it's not a partisan thing where you can say, well, this party is bad on these issues.
No, it's clearly on a graph. It's just going up and up and up.
Correct.
Both parties. Let me interrupt you for a second. You're listening to Mike Fader here on Sirius XM Left 127. We're going to take a break. We have to take a break, and when we come back, maybe since we've delivered all the bad news, we could come up with some encouraging ways to do something about this. You and I can talk about that, because it's good to end on a note like that, right? After all, hope and change, right?
Keep hope alive.
Yeah, right, exactly. We'll see. We'll take a break right now. I'll sell you some erectile dysfunction oil, and then we'll be back. Okay, we're back. This is Mike Fader, Sirius XM Left 127, and we're talking with Ronald Krotoszynski, and it's Reclaiming the Petition Clause. This is by Yale University Press?
That's right.
Okay, and is there a place online where people can go to check out the book? I guess YaleUniversityPress.org or what?
I believe that's writer.com.
Oh, okay. So basically, here's the situation. We only have a couple of minutes left. We have a state in this country, a state of existence, where our vote is influenced by billionaires, where votes are suppressed, where votes are literally stolen. In other words, our vote is a little shaky right now in terms of the effect it has. And before we were talking about the idea of a graph just going up no matter which party was in office, where the executive has more and more control over whether you're allowed to protest or not. So both avenues of expressing our opinion or trying to affect the way the government is or even change the government are being slowly but surely suppressed or shut down. What is left to us?
Well, I mean, I think expressive freedoms are almost like muscles. If you don't use them, they atrophy. And I know, this may sound naive, but I think we have to become more engaged, not only at the national level, but at the local and state level as well.
Well, when you say engage, what do you mean?
I mean, show up at a school board meeting, show up at a city council meeting. If you don't like something that the city is doing or you don't like something your school board is doing, show up. Speak out. That's really the essence of petitioning. It's a kind of democratic feedback loop through which ordinary people who aren't writing $2,500 campaign checks interact with and engage the government. And I think, too, journalists have a role to play, right? I'm not going to name them, but over the past couple of weeks with the conventions, I did speak to several journalists, many of whom were profoundly taken aback by the conditions they found in Tampa regarding, it's lockdown. It was like being, they were comparing it to what they would expect in Baghdad or Kabul.
Well, you may have spoken to these people, but I didn't read anything they wrote about it.
There were a few stories. There was, in fact, an AP story that was pretty critical of the lockdown in Tampa with interviews of people living in Tampa, business folks, even delegates, who were shocked at the level of security. I agree it wasn't on the evening news with any of the networks, but some of the print reporters did, in fact, report critically on security in Tampa and asked the rhetorical question, if this is what's necessary for a party to hold its convention in a major American city, maybe they shouldn't hold their conventions in major American cities. I mean, that would be another solution, right? If security requires this sort of incursion on individual liberty and the ability to speak, maybe we should have an undisclosed location in rural West Virginia where these events take place. Now, of course, they're never going to want to do that. They want to be in Chicago or Tampa or Charlotte because they presence. But if security is really that important, let's build them a bunker outside of Charleston, West Virginia.
Sure. I mean, since it's all just a show anyhow now, there's no real democratic process at the conventions, and it's all just a big Hollywood show, public relations, extravaganza. They could just broadcast it from a soundstage. What's the difference?
I think that's right. The theory is, though, that they're it's part of the Vox Populi, and this is an organic expression of the will of the people. That's why that's the theory. Your sense of skepticism is duly noted and probably appropriate. But the other thing, what can people do? I think they have to challenge these things. In Charlotte, for example, Occupy actually went on again, I'm not advocating in general illegal conduct. You're likely to get arrested. Bad things will happen.
God forbid.
But in fact, there was an illegal march. Charlotte had enacted a really draconian ordinance modeled on Denver's.
I know.
And the police chief didn't. He stayed his hand. He didn't arrest them. He allowed the march to go forward. They came within a few blocks. It was illegal, of course. They could have been arrested. But, more power to Charlotte's police chief. He showed a little bit of sense, a little bit of restraint. The peaceful protest, although unlawful, went off without a hitch. The convention was not disrupted, and Charlotte, didn't have nationwide or worldwide images of Charlotte police officers pepper spraying and gassing peaceful protest.
Okay, so getting involved, we only have 2 minutes left. Getting involved at a local level in a legal way to present your petition, showing up at council meetings, showing up here, showing up there. However, this country itself would not exist, nor would civil rights in this country, nor would there have been an end to the Vietnam War unless millions of people broke the law. So how does that work? Well,
hopefully G20 comes to Chicago. We need people to challenge outrageous restrictions on speech. There were altercations between police and protesters this summer in Chicago, but the designated protest zones were over 2 miles from the convention center. There's just no way that security required banishing all protest within a 2-mile radius of the convention center south of downtown Chicago.
I just don't see any advance being made or any stop being made or slowing being done to this march of power and disregard of the people's rights unless massive civil protests, civil disobedience takes place.
That's probably correct, and it's going to require the federal courts. I mean, remember with the civil rights movement, the Fifth Circuit, judges like Frank Johnson, Skelly Wright, the federal courts worked to ensure that civil liberties, including speech, assembly, petition, were safeguarded and created legal space for these mass protests to occur. So it's going to require brave folks to do exactly what you're saying, to press against these unreasonable restrictions on expressive freedom, on petitioning speech. It's going to require journalists who are willing to cover these events, because if there's, a tree falls in the forest and no one sees it as if it didn't fall.
We've only got about 30 seconds.
Judges who are going to be willing to stand up and enforce the First Amendment, and when the government plays a security card, say that's not good enough.
So when they come after me for advocating something they don't like on the radio, I'll call you up. My first call.
I'll take. I'm not licensed in New York. I'm licensed in Georgia and D.C. So
I'll call you anyhow.
I'm happy to provide that service. Hopefully they'll be smart enough not to come after you for advocating your constitutional rights. But again, I may be naive. I've been accused of being naive by more than one person.
No, if it wasn't for naive people, we wouldn't have had a country in the first place.
I think that's right.
All right. Thank you very much.
Enjoy talking to you. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Okay. Reclaiming the petition clause, and good luck to us all. We might as well be, reclaiming Santa Claus. But we got to try, right? If you don't keep trying, then you give up. You've had it. We'll be back after the 6 o'clock news with yet more fascinating stuff, whether you like it or not. This is Mike Fader again on Sirius XM Left 127. As I mentioned before, if you want to respond to anything you heard here today, you want to get more information, express your opinion, you can do that. And you know how because this is a democracy. You can't present your petition directly to me, because I would have to have my security people lock you up. But if you want to get in touch with me, you can go to my website. You can go to federfiles.com, FEDERFILES.com, FEDERFILES.com. And you can go from there almost anywhere. You can contact me. You can go check out other stuff I do on the radio and other places. And you can check out my Facebook page called Occupied Territory. Facebook page called Occupied Territory, about the occupation of moneyed interests in our government and in our personal lives here in this country, and not the Middle East, which we can get to later. So there's that. Also, anybody who wants to check out the New Republican Prayer, I have something on YouTube, which is not The Innocence of Muslims. It's not that video. I didn't do that. It's called the New Republican Prayer, or New Republican Prayer, and it's about a prayer that Paul Ryan would probably recite. You can check that out on YouTube. All right, so now you all watched the conventions, and you saw this staggering nonsense at the Republican convention about they built it. Now, that's their big thing. Coming off the conventions, President Obama has a new pitch, which his PR people and his advisors put together, which is, we're responsible for the government. He isn't, but we are. He says, you're the ones who can make the change. So he's taken no responsibility for what happens. It's all on us. Coming out of the Republican convention is they built it. If you had a business, you built it all on your own. The government only got in the way, and they didn't contribute anything to it. If you're rich, if you amassed wealth in this country, you worked hard for it, and they're trying to take it away from you, and nobody helped you but yourself. You were on your own when you made that. And we're going to talk to one of the co-authors of a brand new book called The Self-Made Myth, which I can heartily recommend to everybody. The Self-Made Myth, and the truth about how government helps individuals and businesses succeed. And it's by Brian Miller and Mike Lapham, and it is published by Barrett Kohler Publishers. You can get in touch with BK Publishers Incorporated. So that we have two authors. One of them is with us tonight live, and it's Brian Miller. He's the executive director of United for a Fair Economy, UFE, drawing on nearly 20 years as a community organizer, coalition leader, media spokesperson, writer, and nonprofit director. That's very generic. Can you give me some examples?
Oh, well, Mike, I've been doing this work for some time, but yeah, starting down in Louisiana, I did a lot of work on worked with a group called Louisiana Coalition for Tax Justice, ended up in Tennessee for a dozen or so years with another group there called Tennesseans for Fair Taxation, and a few other groups, but now I'm here at United for a Fair Economy, and it's really important work that we've been doing, and I've been really glad to be a part of some successful campaigns over my years here, and over the years I've been doing this kind of organizing work, and in the course of a lot of the work I've been doing, I've had a number of chances to build some very non-traditional allies with business leaders and others. who recognize the importance of all the kind of public infrastructure we're advocating for their own business success. And so that's kind of, and Mike and I kind of got together and really worked on this book as part of that, an outgrowth of that experience that we both had.
Do you come, I don't know about his background, but what about yours? Do you come from a background which is what? I mean, not to be too personal, but is it middle class, or did you build it yourself, or what?
I didn't build it myself. No, I grew up in a middle-class household down in Louisiana.
So you went to public school?
Absolutely.
Okay. So the self-made myth, now you saw the convention, right? You saw this We Built It theme of theirs?
Oh, yeah, even the song.
Right. Okay. I built it, whatever it is. In other words, the government didn't build it, so they should stay the hell out, and they only get in the way. So what you wanted to do, obviously, is write a book about this, and you did. And maybe you could describe, the spine sort of the book, how it moves along.
Sure. Well, the book, actually, and to back up a little bit, the book is something we started working on last year, long before this entered the current election debate, and it was released back in March. And we wrote it simply because we recognized that the narrative of wealth creation, the stories we tell ourselves as a society about where the origins of wealth and individual success come from, those stories shape the way we view inequality, taxes, the role of government, and more. And so we really start out this book by looking at the narratives that are popular in our culture, and some of it is what we're hearing in the election cycle. I built it, we built it, and nobody else helped us along the way. It's this bootstrapping, self-reliant story that we like to hear from those on the right. And
but that didn't come out of nowhere, as you point out in your book, right?
Oh no, I mean it goes all the way back to our nation's founding. We've been going back and forth between these two narratives. We have all the way back to the stories we tell ourselves of how we founded this nation. Carving our livelihoods out of the wilderness and building these homesteads. And it's this big story about self-reliance. Of course, even then, government played a huge role because that land didn't magically appear. It was cleared, and the residents prior were evicted with governmental troops.
Yeah, well, that's sort of a way that government helped in a way that was very unpleasant for the people who were here to begin with, right? I mean,
exactly.
But they did help in a horrible way.
Right, and that's not the kind of help we lift up in the book, but it's government's always had a role in the business success, and then you carry it on through history. You've got back in the 1800s, you've got massive public investments in the railway system, the establishment of our land grant universities. Starting in the early 1900s, you've got a lot of investments in things like the whole 1930s New Deal response, and there was a lot of programs set up there. And then at the post-war period, with massive public investments in science and technology and research and transport, the building of the interstate highway system out of nowhere.
Well, I want to sort of set it in a historical context, because that's what the book starts out with. I mean, basically, you talk about these self-made myths. And you land on one of the most famous writers in the 19th century, if not the most best-selling writer in the country, is Horatio Alger, right? And maybe people don't know who that is, and maybe you could describe Horatio Alger and what the books were like and what that engendered.
Sure. Yeah, going back, and we do go into the history of both of these competing narratives.
Yeah, that's what I'd like to hear.
Yeah, and the self-made myth narrative that's been a big part of our history, goes all the way back to, as I said, nation's founding, but then you've got Benjamin Franklin writing these Poor Richard's Almanac, and then in the 1800s, you had Horatio Alger, and there was actually a number of other writers like Horatio. Horatio was just the most famous of them.
And what did they write?
Well, they churned out these stories, and they were sort of self-help stories, but they were these narratives. They were fiction. I mean, they were stories of these poor kids who came from the country, from destitute poverty, came to the city, made good. They had good character. They didn't smoke, whatever. Usually, they encountered some business person and worked their way up to wealth and success.
I'm sure that did happen, though, right?
There were instances where it happened, clearly, but that's not the norm. That's not the reality for most people.
But in the 19th century, why wouldn't it have been the reality? There wasn't that much in government involvement. And I mean, how many people went to public school in 1840 or 1870?
Well, even beyond public school, I mean, some of the biggest wealth this country, the most wealthy people in this country in those years were the railroad barons.
Yeah.
And those railroads were created largely through governmental action. This was they didn't just appear out of nowhere.
So again, it's governmental action. It wasn't too warmly received by the people who were living at the side of the railroad, right?
No, in many cases not. But we did have a lot of other things being established back in the 1800s. The land grant universities, those were established back in the mid 1800s. I think it was 1848 was the first Land Grant University Act.
And what was that?
Well, basically, the federal government was giving away large tracts of land to states for the creation of universities. And the land was able to be sold off by the states. The profits from those sales were used to establish universities all around the country. And, most of the major public universities we go to are a legacy of that land grant university system, even the university I went to down in Louisiana.
Mm-hmm. And so you had the railroads and you had the land grant university. Then you had the building of, I guess, eventually of roads,
Sure.
Once you get cars coming in.
Sure, ports. Ports, canals. Those early years, we were also heavily reliant on canals.
Mm-hmm.
Those were created through government. Government created these canals, and in doing so, opened up a lot of land for development that was previously inaccessible.
Now you're obviously, I'm taking a slightly devil's advocate point of view. But if the government didn't do that, people could have done that themselves, right?
No, I don't think so. The scale of the things that we need to build together are at a scale that really can't be built privately. We come together because these are things that are bigger than any of us, and they're even bigger than some of the large corporations in the country. And I don't think we want to have a society where, all the schools are owned by, Apple Computer or Exxon.
When you say we don't want to have a society, there's obviously people who do want that.
They're far and few between, but maybe there are, and there probably are some on the extreme right. But yeah.
Well, so after Horatio Alger, you've got this, rags to riches kind of stuff, and that is a big thing in America. Everybody really believes that. Of course, now you might win the lottery, which is a separate thing, and also that's the government runs that, so it's a government gambling casino. But then we're moving into another that sort of blends directly into this Ayn Rand stuff, and maybe Ayn Rand rather, and you could explain that, maybe.
Sure. As you said, Horatio Alger was probably the most prominent narratives of or writers that perpetuated the self-made myth in the 19th century. Come the mid-20th century, Ayn Rand comes along and writes her book Atlas Shrugged, and she churned out a bunch of other novels that really tell these sort of mythical stories of these business leaders, these captains of industry, who are, the fundamental narrative, the fundamental story of Ayn Rand is that all wealth derives from these heroic captains of industry. They are the wellspring upon which all wealth derives, and in a way, she takes the Horatio Alger success to a new level, because not only are her heroes responsible for their own success, they're responsible for the success of the entire society around us. We're all sort of beholden to them.
So if they didn't build, because of their entrepreneurial skill and their genius and their hard work, if they didn't build these gigantic corporations, then hundreds of thousands, actually millions of people wouldn't have jobs at all.
Yeah, that's the essential story, and the narratives that she tells in her books really sort of demonize government. It's government is the enemy, and she tells it in I would say a sort of cartoonish way. I don't think it's the best writing in the world, but
how does the government interfere?
Well, in her stories, of course, the government is she's dealing. The railroad, you have to excuse me. It's been a long time since I've read the full story.
Well, just generally,
just generally, it has to do with taxes, it has to do with regulations, it has to do with set-asides, and all these ways that these business leaders are being inhibited by these governmental action. And
I guess the government also permits union organizing and things like that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Okay, so basically, but here, just before we move on a little bit from that. If I give you some names like Henry Ford or the original Rockefeller, John D. Rockefeller, or Andrew Carnegie, the Strauss family that built Macy's, all these people who built these gigantic fortunes. I'm not going to talk about people like J.P. Morgan because I don't consider banks legitimate businesses. But a car company, Henry Ford, Macy's. Carnegie, with the coal and everything else like that, the Vanderbilts, with the railroads. these people probably would have hired their own armies and functioned without government. And they did provide, Ford provided a huge number of jobs. And the government, how did the government help Henry Ford do anything?
Well, the government built the roads that all his cars drove on.
Well, there you go.
If it weren't for the road system, there would be no market for the cars that Henry Ford and the Ford Motor Company built. It goes hand in hand, and that's I think one of the things when you take it back, and one of the things that we really draw out of this story is that it's not an either or question. It's not a government or business. It's both and. They go hand in hand, and we shouldn't be afraid of that. In the old days, people would call that a mixed economy or whatever, but the bottom line is that it's a both-and thing. We do need government, but we also need entrepreneurs. And when we emerge in this book, we're not discounting that hard work and good ideas don't matter. They do. But they matter within the context of a well-funded, public education system, transportation system, and so on. And a lot of the business leaders we profile really, really tell compelling stories about the interconnectedness of all this.
Well, give me an example of a couple of people.
Sure. When we go through, of course, there's the great quote from Warren Buffett, where he says something along the lines of, "If you stick me in Bangladesh or Peru, you'll see how much my skill is worth if it's not in the right kind of soil." And Bill Gates Sr., who wrote the foreword for the book, tells a very similar story about his son. He goes, if my son had been born in a developing nation in South America, he may be just as smart, assuming he got the right prenatal care. But the Microsoft story would be a dramatically different story because he wouldn't have had the wealth of educated people to come help him. He wouldn't have had the copyright protections, the court systems, the transportation system to ship his goods around. He would just be a smart guy. That would be about the end of the story.
Same thing maybe for Steve Jobs.
Sure. So there's a lot of other factors that weigh in, but governmental supports is certainly one of the very important pieces of it.
Well, now take a couple of people like, and when you're talking about self-made myth, I mean, I guess the worst example, because he's, and when I say worst, I mean worst, is somebody like Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump is an example to a lot of people who really don't know much about his background of an aggressive, self-made businessman who has made billions of dollars, and all on his own effort, willpower, and he just built it himself. Now, maybe you could talk a little bit about Donald Trump, where he comes from, and how he built it.
Sure. Donald Trump, first off, he comes from wealth. His father was a real estate developer. His father made his fortune building, incidentally, governmentally funded FHA housing in the post-war period. He made his fortune in real estate, building these FHA funded houses and some housing near military bases and things like that, and left. And so his son moved into that business, his father's business. He eventually took it over. Eventually inherited a substantial wealth from his father. And grew it. Yes, he grew it from there. But then, even beyond that, there were points in his life where he was about to go belly up, and he got all these bank bailouts. There's no way you can tell the Donald Trump story as a self-made narrative of he did it alone. The reality is he came from privilege. He came from wealth. And he benefited from an enormous number of public investments throughout his life in regulatory environments, courts, and further, and so on.
What about the Koch brothers? I mean, did they build it themselves?
Same story. The Koch brothers started with a very substantial inheritance. Their business, they've got an oil business or gas business that uses public lands for running their pipelines in public domain. Eminent domain. Eminent domain law to get their pipelines run across the country. They also have some cattle that they're grazing on public land. And of course, any business in this country, has to realize that their entire workforce is largely educated through our public education system.
Well, I mean, what about a company like Walmart? I mean, the Walton family is the richest family. As a family, they're the richest family in the world, I guess, except for the bunch of Arab sheiks in Saudi Arabia, the royal family there. But the Walton family, there are like 6 members of it that have tens of billions of dollars each. And now they inherited this all from their father. Is it Sam? You know? Yeah. Who built all this? Now, when Sam Walton built all these department stores, could he have built it without government assistance?
Well, you know, and I think we need to move. Well, probably not. I mean, government assistance, direct assistance, he probably did benefit from. I'm sure he got tax abatements and all kinds of things for the building of the stores. Mm-hmm. But stepping back and taking a more landscape view, the reality is even beyond those direct benefits. You know, what this really is this is about a recognition that we are all part of one larger society. And when government invests in infrastructure, when government invests in human capital, in education, and in opportunity, you know, and when government creates stable rules of the roads, government is basically creating a fertile ground upon which businesses can thrive. And so, yes, you know, you can't drive to a Walmart store unless you go on a public road. You know, there's fire departments who protect that Walmart store, and police departments that, you know, prevent people from destroying it. Not to mention all the copyright laws and courts and the financial regulations that provide a stable framework upon which that, you know, they're able to get people investing in the stock market and buying Walmart stocks. They wouldn't do that if it weren't for an SEC that provided the kind of confidence that...
SEC and competence? Did you use that in the same sentence?
SEC that provides the confidence.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought you said competence. The
Securities and Exchange Commission provides the confidence.
Okay.
Because the reality is even when you look at our entire market system, there's you know, there's this perception that somehow Wall Street just emerges, but Wall Street is also an emergence of governmental action. You know, because if it weren't for the Securities and Exchange Commission, there would be nothing to prevent people from lying about how much money they have in reserves, what their financial statements look like, but the SEC requires a certain auditing and reporting format that gives investors some sense of security that, oh, I'm not being scammed by this stock. Obviously, they fail from time to time, especially when we've let deregulation go way too far. But, you know, all of these all of these investments, all of these things that government does, creates the kind of fertile ground that makes business possible.
So why, if you had to guess, or if you want to venture an opinion, why is the Republican Party making such a big deal about this? I mean, if most of the country, if the common welfare depends on government stimulating, you know, jobs and stimulating the economy for jobs, if everything rests so much on what the public does and the government does with the public's taxes, why are they making such a big deal about government interference, and why are there tens of millions of people going to vote for a man who says government is the enemy? Why is that?
Well, I think there's two reasons. One, of course, the wealthy folks at the top would love to absolve themselves of any responsibility of paying back to support the society that made their wealth possible. You know, it's sort of like, you know, they've got to the top, now they're pulling up the ladder and telling everyone else to just go to, you know, you deal with your own problems, whatever. So there's a certain amount of pulling up the ladder, which is really pretty disturbing. But you know, there are people who do that. But the other thing is that I think there's a deep recognition that if they can get the broad American public to believe that all wealth derives from these heroic individuals, these Ayn Rand characters who challenge everything in front of them, and you know, through their gumption, their hard work, their smarts, then all of a sudden a whole set of public policies flows from that. Because if you truly believe that, then things like inequality, well, that's just the result of differing work efforts. That's because some people work really hard and they're smart, and other people are lazy bums.
So income inequality basically is the result of people just either being blessed or not working hard enough, blessed with smarter, you know, with more smarts, more aggression, more willpower. You know,
exactly. I mean, and from this belief system, you know, again, and if you buy into this self-made myth, this "we built it without any help" narrative, then progressive taxes, well, that's punishing success, right?
Right.
It's their money; they should be able to keep it. You know, government's the enemy. There's a whole set of policy. You know, again, this goes back to the point of how we believe and how we think about wealth creation in this country impacts the way we view everything from taxes to the role of government to inequality. But when you flip that script, when you look at what we in the book in the self-made myth call the built-together reality, which one, yes, the built-together reality acknowledges, yes, hard work is important, smarts is obviously important, but so is luck, so is timing, so are head starts in life. the contributions of others, including the many workers.
You do point out in the book that most of the people that you talk about who made a tremendous amount of money were essentially middle class people, not working their way up from rags, right?
Oh yeah. I don't think there's many of the profilees in our book that really came from rags. I mean, they're mostly middle class folks or upper middle class folks who created a successful business. Privilege is a big part of the story here.
Well, I mean, look, there are certain businessmen, for instance, like George W. Bush before he was president, was a businessman, right? And he built it himself, didn't he?
Yeah, I think there's a great quote about George Bush. He was born on third base and thought he hit a triple.
Yeah, that sounds like George Bush. Yeah. You know what? Before we're going to take a break now. We have to take a break. Can you stick around? Maybe we get some calls because I get a lot of calls from. We're talking, by the way, to Brian Miller, who with Mike Lapham wrote a new book you should really check out called "The Self-Made Myth" and the truth about how government helps individuals and businesses succeed. Self-Made Myth. And I get a lot of calls and have for a long time over here. And you do talk about taxes in your book and government, also the government, helping people. And a lot of people are complaining about the government hurting people. I get many calls and have for years from people who identify themselves as small business owners, and not so small sometimes, people who have 40 or 50 or a couple of hundred employees, but still considered a small business. And they are very adamant on this subject. They do really feel that government hurts them far more than it helps them. And maybe we can address that. Also, when we come back, maybe we can take some of your calls. The number here is 866-997-4748. If you have a point of view that agrees with the general Republican point of view, that government only gets in the way, and government should be very small and interferes with people's entrepreneurship qualities, if it interferes with business, the ability to retain your money if you worked hard for it, if you feel like government really is the problem and it doesn't help, or you agree that it does and you want to call up, this is the time to do it. 866-997-4748. And Brian Miller is on. We're going to take a break and come back, and then we'll see what we'll see. Okay, back to the job creation mill. The Self-Made Myth is the name of the book, and Brian Miller, who's one of the co-authors, is on with us. Let me ask you a couple of questions before maybe we try to take some calls. Obviously, you have to talk about taxes here as part of the built-together reality and a progressive tax. And let me just quote something from the book here. But giving back is not a matter of benevolence. It's a responsibility. By acknowledging the role that government plays in strengthening the wide array of public investments in the economic framework upon which business success is possible, it follows that they, that is people with a lot of money who earned a lot of money, should contribute toward the maintenance of those shared assets. And then here, put more directly, those who receive the greatest benefit from the economy our government makes possible should contribute the greatest share towards its maintenance. That sounds fair, but that's certainly not the point of view that a lot of people have. And maybe one other question here. You do talk about specific tax policies, and one is ending the special tax break for capital gains and dividend income, taxing inherited wealth, and obviously we all understand ensuring that corporations pay their fair share. But maybe you could explain the tax policy that you think should be that way because of what people should give back to society.
Sure. I think, there's a lot of the essential message here, and part of what we're looking at, there's a lot of the business leaders we profile in the book who speak of and recognize, there's almost everyone that we profile in the book are people who are business people themselves. There's one person, though, that we did profile who's primarily an inheritor, Abigail Disney.
Right.
And she has this great quote in here that talks about, one, she's very humble enough to acknowledge that she didn't do anything to earn that money. But she also tells a compelling story about her grandfather and about her grandfather's even it was spoken, and she knew that her grandfather would agree that his business success was not done in spite of government. It was made because of government, because of without roads to take people to Disneyland, without copyright protection for Mickey Mouse, there would be no Walt Disney World. There would be no Walt Disney Empire. And as such, she wrote this op-ed in USA Today in support of a strong estate tax that her family, she felt that her family should pay to support that society that made that fortune possible. And a lot of that money should be recycled for the next generation of entrepreneurs who come along. And I think that's part of what we're talking about here, because most of the business leaders that we profile, they understand that they get a whole lot from these public investments that support their business. And there's a concept that as you quoted there, actually I think that was an Adam Smith quote that we use in the book.
Oh yeah.
Those who receive the greatest benefit. The premier thinker of free market economics is also one of the premier writers about progressive taxation, or one of the first writers about advocates of progressive taxation, because there's an understanding that one, as businesses get bigger, as people become more wealthy, they are using more and more and more of all these public investments, and it only follows that progressive tax policies, it's only reasonable and fair for them to pay, progressively more, and that's what a lot of the business leaders that we profile recognize. And there's a lot of unfairness of this whole thing about investment income versus income from labor.
Oh yeah, can you maybe get in some detail about that, because you've got a guy running for president who pays 15% on huge amounts of money when the average person pays something like 33%.
Yeah, absolutely. There's when inequality, well, bottom line is that we've got a system that rewards, in a country, this whole book's about hard work. It's about people who've worked hard, and we're celebrating these business leaders in the book, and they know they worked hard. But in a country that supposedly honors hard work, to have a tax system that taxes income earned from work at more than twice the rate of income earned from sitting on a boat collecting interest in your investment portfolio is just profoundly outrageous. So yeah, it absolutely, it's one of the things that many of the people have, and that's exactly why Warren Buffett has come out and speaking in favor of the Buffett rule. The reason his tax rates are so low is because it's all from investment income. And
the reason that those rules exist is because the people who have all this money manage to get the congressmen to pass these bills and presidents sign them, giving them tax breaks, right?
Absolutely, yeah, and because there are people like the Koch brothers, like the Trumps, who are doing their best to pull up the ladder behind them, and in doing that, they're gutting the tax system. They are, and they're leaving, a severely underfunded infrastructure. And there's one of the business leader that we profile in the book that actually there's a bunch of them, obviously. Jim Sherblum tells a truly compelling story, and this is the pulling the ladder up story.
And what's his business?
He was the CFO of Genzyme, which was one of the larger pharmaceutical companies in the country. They do pharmaceutical research and whatnot. But he tells this really, really powerful story about historical timing, right? He talks about, he's middle-aged, older. He grew up in the generation when we still had a robustly funded education system, when college was almost free, when, the GI bills were being given out left and right, when, we were still in that post-Sputnik phase when just massive public investments were going into our human capital as a nation. And he talks about how after 30 years of systematic defunding of all these investments, universities have reached a point where now the only way that you can, middle-class family can go to university, get a college education, is to mount up mountains of debt. The entire infrastructure that we built has been systematically defunded. And he talks about how his children, who are now just coming of age, they're now just in college age, are facing such a profoundly different reality than he faced. They're growing, they're coming of age at a time when we have the highest levels of inequality this nation has seen since the 1920s. They're coming of age at a time when public investments have been systematically dismantled through decades of defunding of higher ed, and he goes on to make the case that no wonder young people are at the front line of Occupy. They really are facing a very different reality than these post-war baby boomers who really had it well. At least if they were white, there was a lot of race issues going on. But those folks who grew up in white America in the 1950s and 60s really benefited from massive public investments, and we've been going in the other direction. We've been pulling up the ladder and not creating the kind of future we need for our children and the younger generations.
Well, let's take a call now. I have a couple of other questions about the book and about what you're writing about, but let's see if we've got anybody. Elliot, where are you from, Elliot?
I'm a truck driver. I'm in Massachusetts.
Okay, go ahead. You're on the air.
Yeah. One of the areas where one of the points that I'd like to make is about the rural electrification project, which were cooperatives that were set up in areas to provide electricity in rural areas where it wouldn't have been economic for a corporation or somebody in some large financier to get involved in providing electricity in rural areas. And
that was very big.
Anything about it?
That was very big in the 30s and 40s, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Because I know President Johnson was heavily involved in it originally as a congressman. Anyhow, go ahead.
It happened over many decades. And I'm just wondering if your guest knew anything about that, because I thought it was interesting that it didn't involve, where it didn't benefit directly. It probably did indirectly, some of the large moneyed classes that we're talking about here.
Yeah, I think, and that really gets to the question of opportunity, and are we going to, because one of the premises that we really make in this book is that, again, we're celebrating entrepreneurs. We think it's great. It's great for a person to start a business, but the reality is we have a society where the deck is stacked. It's stacked incredibly, and privilege and luck are so important in who gets to succeed and who doesn't, because the reality is there's tons of people out there with brilliant ideas, with entrepreneurial spirit who would like to start a business, but for a variety of reasons, those options are just not available to them. And the rural electrification is an example of that. That was done because there were whole segments of society that were going to be left behind if we let market forces do it all. Because it's the same thing today with high-speed internet. If you leave it to the market, what's going to happen is you're going to have high-speed internet in wealthy neighborhoods and in urban centers, but rural communities and low-income communities are just going to get left behind. And there is a public role, there's a legitimate public role for making sure that we don't leave whole sections of our country behind.
Well, let me ask you what is probably in the unconsciouses and the consciences of a lot of Republicans. What's the difference if they're left behind? I mean, that's the way it goes. You know what I mean? If there are several million people who just slip beneath the safety net and don't get these advantages, and they don't have the ability to do it, it's just too bad for them.
There's and there are people who may hold that view. They actually do hold that view. You're absolutely right.
Yeah.
There's two responses. One is just the humanitarian side of it. It's just not right. But even if you take that side of it, take that off the equation. Take the whole fairness issue off the equation.
Yeah, forget about that.
Economically, it just doesn't make sense. Garrett Gruner, we didn't profile him in the book, but we quoted him in the book. He's the founder of Ask.com. Very wealthy, successful. He's now a venture capitalist out on the West Coast. But he makes this very, very compelling case in an op-ed that he wrote about how, and Henry Ford made the same case too, really. Incidentally, you brought him up earlier, that when inequality gets too far out of hand, if government wants to help businesses in this country succeed, government needs to support the middle class. Because if there aren't customers out there to buy the products we're building, buy the things we're making, then there's no it's violent. When inequality gets too far out of hand, the whole economic system crashes. I mean,
what if I tell you that I've got a product and I'm turning out 3 million examples of this product every year, and then I notice that there's not many people in this country who can buy it. Let's say it costs $192 per unit, and people can't buy it because they don't have jobs anymore because things are so bad. And so what do I care? I'll just ship it to someplace where they can buy it overseas.
Well, maybe good luck in that. But the reality is but if we do invest in those middle class Americans, if we do have a vibrant middle class, then there's that many more customers, because there's nothing to prevent you from shipping it overseas and selling it domestically, and then you're that much more successful. And the reality is that when we have a strong middle class in this country, when we have people who can afford to buy the stuff, and going back to Henry Ford, I mean, Henry Ford was well known for paying his workers far above market rate.
So they could buy his cars.
Yes, he wanted to have workers who made enough that they could buy the very products they were making.
So it really wasn't so much benevolence on his part as it was good business, right?
Yeah, it just makes good business sense. Yeah.
Well, you know what? Well, let's I'm sorry.
Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, one thing I guess in response to what your question was, that I think a lot of how this country will be viewed is how we treat people who have nothing versus those who have something, and versus the people who are on the underclass versus the people who are on the overclass. That, we are better off when we spread everything around amongst everybody rather than when we have large lumps in one corner and nothing in other corners. No. I don't know if I represented it very well, but that's...
No, you put it very well. It's obviously there's a lot of people who just don't seem to share that common welfare viewpoint. Chris from New York, you're on.
Hey, how you doing? I got an idea. I just want to see what you think about this. I'll give you an example. Say if there was in a voting app, like an application on everybody's phone, and it was mandatory that every citizen have that, and we have like this voting system where you can press the button and vote from there, and it's verifiable. It's like it's safe to vote. Say like that was established already.
Yeah.
That to me would influence the capitalist system and how wealth is distributed. Give you an example. Say like you got a population which is in poverty of 40,000 people within a zip code, and you got a few people that are wealthy in another zip code. Their votes turn into money because if they can influence the politicians who make the policies within that state in their area. It's not a corporation. Instead of lobbying the politicians, will lobby the voters. You understand what I'm saying? And they say like...
Well, you're basically just talking about the vote being as accessible as possible, which is what people are working at all the time. So you're talking about a technological improvement and make voting much easier and then less influenced by money, right?
Yes, and then your vote actually becomes a currency in a way that can be used, in the politician world to make policies. So like a business says, I want to open up a new school or something that a community denies. They broker a deal with the corporation. Say, oh yeah, you can come in here and open this, but you have to do so and so for this community, whatever they need in terms of jobs and stuff like that.
All right, it's an idea. I mean, but the whole idea of making voting fairer is obviously at the root of a great deal of this. Let's go to Jay. Where's Jay from? Utah. Jay from Utah. You're on. You there?
Thanks for taking my call, Mike. Yeah. What happens? It seems, I don't mean to be negative, but it seems like there's a group of people that want to privatize everything. How's that going to affect life here in our economy?
Brian, you want to talk about that?
Well, sure. I think, going back to, that's one of the things that we do talk about there. I mean, there's a lot of different strains of privatizing. In some cases, privatizing, a bus system or whatever for a school just means there's more people, stockholders to pay and whatever. I don't know how much efficiency. And there's also a lot of evidence that many of these things don't provide real efficiency. But there's also, other questions about... There's versions of privatization when things are privatized, but their companies are still required to provide service to everyone. But then there's other versions which is really just the public no longer providing this good, and it's now a private good, and that's a very different question because that really, really, really starts damaging opportunity. Again, going back to the high-speed internet, if left to market forces alone, we're going to have whole sections of society that are left behind. There's a legitimate governmental role to come in and require that service is being provided, to all communities.
Privatizing is exceedingly dangerous for all sorts of reasons, and there's no evidence yet that it actually provides anything better in terms of service. Generally, it's worse, like privatized prisons and things. I mean, there are trends being considered. I think there's even one place in California where you can pay extra for better fire protection. So they'll show up if you're not on their gold list or their platinum list. They'll let your house burn down.
Exactly, and that is deeply, deeply disturbing.
Well, that's
as a society that the reality is we are supposed to be a community of people who are in it together, and we've been drifting away from that from 30 years of misguided policies. And part of the message of our book, The Self-Made Myth, is that we need to reinvigorate that social contract that really acknowledges that our prosperity is deeply intertwined.
Let us try another call. Keith, you're on, Keith.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
Sure.
I had an idea about how we could clean up our entire system. The problem is getting it implemented. Would be to treat our elected representatives like you would treat a jury. A jury is sequestered. They're not allowed to speak about things that they're talking about outside the jury room. And I believe that our representatives in Congress and the Senate should be the same way. You can talk about legislature, but you talk about it in the open. You don't talk about it with lobbyists only over private dinners, because that means that some people have better access. If you can pay for the lobbyists, you have the access. Where I would say, you allow people to submit position papers, essentially. Anybody can submit a paper on a certain piece of legislation that's up. And I think that would level the playing field for all of us.
All right.
Well, I was just going to say, though, the people that have to change it are the ones that benefit most from having the lobbyists there.
Yeah, well, there's the problem. Let's take one last call, and then Brian, you can have the last word here. We've got about 5 minutes left.
Okay.
Alvin from Alabama, you're on.
Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Okay.
Hello to you. Yes. You guys were talking, and you were talking about the idea that companies could increase their profits by having a market here at home that could buy their products. Well, I'm kind of old guy, and what I've noticed about these people, they don't really care about that. They want to make their profits, of course, but what you're not factoring into this, they like being God. Mitt Romney said it best. He likes being able to fire people. He likes having people that are kind of scared rappers, and they're bullies. They control. They can buy lobbyists. They can buy the legislation they want. One quick thing: the Koch brothers. They own Georgia Pacific, and they're dumping all kind of toxins into rivers that are causing people's cancers. Now, one of the Koch brothers has healed from cancer. He's recovered from cancer himself. You would think he'd have a sensitivity toward people who are getting cancer from a product that he's making, but he does not, because he likes being that God.
Well, one thing we have to understand is there will always be psychopaths in every society. In fact, if you just look at a chart throughout history, there's a certain percentage of psychopathic behavior in every society, and there always will be. These people don't care what happens to other people. They want everything for themselves. They have no interest in morals or equality. You have to constantly fight these people. I think this is something that people have to accept. You have to constantly fight these people. This whole idea of the commonwealth or the common good is something that's something that most people share, but unfortunately, a lot of very strong, driven people with a lot of power don't share that point of view, and this is sort of why we have a book like this.
They made that idea a dirty word.
Yeah. Okay, Brian, go ahead.
Sure.
That idea of commonality is socialistic or communist.
Yeah, that somehow they managed to make that a bad thing. In fact, actually, it's the best possible thing. That's what the original Christianity was based on, anyhow. Brian, go ahead.
Well, this has been a great conversation, Mike, and I really appreciate, being on the show. A few just comments to throw out there is that, right now we're standing at this unique window of opportunity, and to both of your previous callers were talking about, obviously, the influence of money in politics, and we do work on that, and that's something that's very, very important for us to be doing and to regain our democracy, because in order for us to implement the kind of policies we need to change, we need to regain control of our democracy. And it's all tied together, but one of the things that we're facing right now, and this is because this has come up in this election cycle, because of the Republicans' "we built it" theme and Obama's "you didn't build that" comment, we have a unique opportunity to really open up this debate around the origins of wealth and individual success. And our book, we hope, is a very useful tool in doing that. And so we have a website, actually, selfmademyth.org, okay. Where people can go. There's action steps you can take. People can tell their stories. We encourage people to write letters to the editor and things like that, because, if we're going to build a new narrative of wealth creation, a narrative that recognizes the role of the common good, that recognizes that we're all in it together, and recognizes the community that we all share as foundational upon which all success is possible, then we need to build that narrative together. And everyone plays a role in doing that. And again, selfmademyth.org. You can also go to our organizational website for United for a Fair Economy, which is just faireconomy.org, to learn more about the work we're doing.
Okay, thank you. Again, the book is The Self-Made Myth, and selfmademyth.org, right?
That's correct.
Okay. Yeah. So check it out. I mean, part of the problem also is, it's cultural. This country puts a tremendous investment culturally, and it's in our DNA here, in individual heroes conquering the wilderness, Superman, John Wayne. You know what I mean? I mean, this is part of the whole self-made myth that there are powerful, great superheroes that will come out of nowhere and save us, and nobody helps them. They have their own. They rely on their own selves. So this goes very deep in American history. You know.
Absolutely, and one of the things we talk about in the book is the role of narrative in this, because really these are cultural stories. They're like myths. And cultural stories have heroes and villains. It's narrative, and it is far more important than facts and numbers and figures in who we are as people. And Ayn Rand and Horatio Alger, they've got their stories, with their heroes and villains. And incidentally, both of their writers were fiction. So when we wrote our book, we tell the very same stories, but we tell it. This is nonfiction. These are real business people, and they're real stories about how they came to success, how they benefited from GI bills, and a host of public investments. And it's very, very compelling stories. But like those other narratives, these are narratives, true narrative stories that are powerful. And again, we hope the self-made myth is helping to shift this narrative of wealth creation, because it's not as black and white as these self-made people who came out and were completely reliant on themselves. The reality is the world's a lot more nuanced than that.
All right. Thank you very much.
Okay. Thank you, Mike. Glad to be on the program.
Okay. Brian Miller and Mike Lapham is the co-author. 7 o'clock coming up after the news. We're going to talk to a couple of people who worked for at least 30 years, both of them in the same plant out in the Midwest that Bain Capital owns and is dismantling and shipping to China, and they're trying to do something about it. That's right after the 7 o'clock news. And then we can talk about what's going on in the Middle East and how we have mirror images of idiot, bigoted thugs, of religious zealots on both sides having a game of seesaw, and we're all in the middle, and we're getting burned up by it. And that will be after the 7 o'clock news. Take it away, Mr. Engineer. And this is Mike Fader back again. So Mr. Bain Capital is out on the road running for president, talking about how we all built our own businesses and he built his own business. If we know even a little bit about Bain Capital, we know that he didn't build a damn thing. Basically what he did was he took some of his money, borrowed a tremendous amount from banks, and leveraged his way into other corporations, put tremendous debt on them, and either bankrupted them or they got better, whether or not they were able to do it on their own, and sold off parts of it, and in some cases closed down companies and shipped their production facilities to China. I'm going to read part of a press release I got the other day. On Wednesday, that's this past Wednesday, this is from Freeport, Illinois. On Wednesday, workers facing outsourcing by Bain began to camp outside the Sensata factory in Freeport, Illinois, to protest Bain's decision to ship their jobs to China and continue their call on former Bain CEO Mitt Romney, who still profits directly from Sensata, from this factory, to help save their jobs. They were down in Tampa protesting, and now they're up in Freeport where the factory is. Romney has so far ignored their plea, of course, for help, and the workers are determined to camp out until Romney comes to Freeport. Meanwhile, they'll make the reality of Romney's vision for our economy clear to Freeport residents and voters across the country. We have on the line Tom Gallrap, who I spoke to a couple of weeks ago when he was down in Tampa, and he's here with us, and maybe he can explain a little bit about what's going on. You're at Sensata. What is Sensata? What do they produce? What kind of company is it?
Sensata Technologies produces transmission sensors for cars. Mm-hmm. If it fails, your car is going to stop. And they bought the production line from Honeywell a couple of years ago and decided that they were going to move the jobs to China. So,
basically what they did is they actually flew a lot of the Chinese employees into Illinois, and you had to train them to take over your job, right?
That's correct. And when while they were here, they took the American flag down in front of the building that had flown there since it was opened. And when they left, they put it back up. So
Oh, they didn't want to offend the Chinese visitors?
Exactly.
Oh, man. So how long have you worked at this place?
I worked in this plant for 33 years.
33 years, yeah. So how old are you now?
I am 54 years old.
So you've been there basically most of your adult life?
Yeah, my entire working, or pretty much my entire working life, yeah.
And
wrapped up in this one plant.
So are you in a union? How's the pay?
No, it's not union. If we had known then what we know now, we would have done that. But we had a really good working relationship with the original Honeywell. But Honeywell got bought up in the around the year 2000 by a company called Allied Signal. And once they took over, they began this outsourcing of jobs to other locations.
Well, how did Bain Capital get involved in all this? So did they buy out?
Yeah, Bain Capital owns this company, Sensata Technologies.
Oh, okay.
And they came in and they bought the automotive sensors division from Honeywell, which we work for, and then they leased space in the plant and bought all the equipment and the patent rights and everything that goes with that.
How is the pay for your job? I mean, was it like a decent average pay or good pay?
Yeah. It's very, very good manufacturing jobs. Probably I would say between $14 to $17 an hour is probably the average. Somewhere in that dollar range.
Was there a decent health plan?
Actually, when Sensata came in, their health plan is better than the Honeywell one, but of course, the drawback is they're moving the jobs out of the country.
Did they give you any, I mean, not that they're required to, of course, but did they give you any reason why they're shutting this down and moving it to China?
Well, they have made two statements about why this is going, about the movement. The first one was that they bought it only for the Honeywell customers, because they want, that way they had a market. And the other one was that if they weren't going to move it to China, they wouldn't have bought it in the first place. And that's been the only comments that they've made.
Well, but that's a lie, right? I mean,
yeah. Well, I mean, the product has always made a profit, so they're not moving it because it's not profitable.
Oh, really?
Sensata Technologies set a record last year for the largest profits they've ever had.
Well, if they're making so much profit, why would they move it?
Well, because the Chinese government built them a plant over there and handed them the keys to it and said, here you go.
So they can make even more profit, probably, because they'll pay those workers a lot less.
Oh, exactly right. Even though the one piece of equipment that they have moved over there, which took one person to operate it in Freeport, they are using 13 people to operate it in China.
It's still going to cost less.
Yeah, right, exactly. Well, plus the Chinese government, I'm sure, as a condition of building this plant, said you must employ X number of people.
So what happens? I mean, are you laid off now?
No, I received my 60-day notice the day after, well, actually 2 days after Labor Day. So my last day is actually scheduled to be on November 5th. So on November 6th, after I go vote, I will be going to the unemployment line to sign up for unemployment compensation.
Well, I mean, you live in a house? Is your mortgage paid off or what?
Oh no. I have mortgage payment. I have the same bills that everybody has, and and there's going to be there's no comparable jobs as far as income goes.
Right.
So
then you got to pay your mortgage, and you're going to have to come up with something about health insurance, right?
Yeah, exactly. And health insurance, buying it on your own is an impossibility. Cobra's $1,800 a month. Well, who's got that kind of money? That's a working person. Nobody does. Well,
but unemployment. How are you going to pay your mortgage?
I'm actually better than some people because in March I can start drawing on my Honeywell pension, which will be a little bit, not enough to live off of, but a little bit. And then as long as the unemployment holds out, I should be able to continue to make the mortgage payments. But after that, it's anybody's guess.
What and how old are you now?
I'm 54 years old.
It's going to be really, really hard to find another job, right?
Oh, yeah. You know, a part of the Trade Adjustment Act that's supposed to help us be retrained, you know, when our jobs are moved offshore, is that we should be able to go to the community college for 2 years not at our expense, but 2 years of community college, and then I'd be 56, and how is that, you know, who's going to hire me then, you know, is you know, a question that, you know, there just are not well-paying jobs here.
How many people are there in the plant?
There are 170 people that are being let go, but the effect of this is much greater than that because our area of the country has really suffered from loss of manufacturing jobs.
Yeah.
So a lot of the small businesses in the area are right on the edge of survival versus collapse, and you suddenly remove these very well-paying jobs that are, you know, right at the top of the area picture. And as far as the well-paying jobs go, I mean, yeah, it's a very bleak future for everybody here.
I guess that has a kind of a domino effect, right? Because if you've got like hundreds of people who are the main wage earners in a community, then also it affects stores, gas stations, and everything else that's there, right?
Well, that and you know, we'll no longer be paying taxes because we're no longer working.
Right.
So instead of paying tax money, we're going to be using tax money in the form of unemployment compensation and the other things that we might be able to access in the social safety net. And you know, we don't mind paying our taxes, but we would prefer that they go for something that everybody gets a benefit out of.
Right.
You know, and we don't want to be using tax dollars, you know, for this stuff. And it's, you know, it's just a shame that the only motivation is somebody thinking they need more money.
So this kind of thing is going on at your place, and then it's going on a lot around where you are. But if I ask you, who are most of the people around you voting for, what would you say?
Well, this area has been a very Republican stronghold for a long time. And part of that is the Republicans don't campaign here because
they take
people
it for
are going to
granted.
vote for them anyway.
Right.
And the Democrats don't campaign here because no matter what they do, people aren't going to vote for them anyway. But this has seen a change. There is definitely there's a lot of people who have the same view that we do, that if somebody who works for a living and is a working middle class person, why they would ever cast a vote for Mitt Romney is absolutely something we don't understand. Because
no, I don't think I think a lot of people don't understand it.
You know, there's really two possible explanations for why they do this stuff.
Yeah.
One is that they don't understand the effect it has on the community. They don't see the people whose lives they're ruining because people that already have more money than they know what to do with just want some more. So that's scenario one. And scenario two is they don't care. And, you know, for anybody to know that they're destroying somebody's lives just out of pure greed and not let them bother them, well, you know, it just boggles the mind how people can be that way.
Well, you got an entire political party who seems to be acting that way.
Well, they walk around and they say, we measure the success of a person, of a human being, based on how much money is in their bank account. And it's like, I know people with a lot of money who are complete jerks. And I also know people who don't have any money at all who would give the shirt off their back to somebody who needed it. So to me, that latter person is more of a success as a human being than somebody who's got more money than they know what to do with, and yet just continues to accumulate it.
Well, amen. I don't know what else to say. I mean, obviously that's the way most people feel, but maybe hopefully, we have somebody on the line. Maybe we take a call. Shelley from Wisconsin, you're on. You there, Shelley?
Hello?
Yeah, you're on the line. Go ahead.
Oh, okay. I was just going to comment on that guy ahead of me that was talking about the job moving to China.
Well, he's on the line right now.
Oh, okay. Well, that's what's going on with the president. Has nothing to do with the Republicans.
I'm sorry. What is his job going to China have to do with the president? I don't get you.
Well, he's saying about his job moving to China.
Yeah.
Well, that's more, and he's about losing his job.
Yeah, and
that's what is going on right now. That's why we're saying, that's why the Republicans are saying it's getting worse out there. And he keeps saying about these small companies are barely hanging in. Well, that's more on what we're trying to get about what's going on with the president. But that's on him, not the Republicans.
You still aren't explaining to me how is it that this man losing his job because Bain Capital bought the company and is shipping, that's Romney, and is shipping the jobs to China. What has that got to do with the president?
Well, why is he saying that it has anything to do with the Republicans?
Shelley, it's been nice talking to you. Goodbye. I don't know. Tom, I'm sorry.
Well, we hear a lot of that, of people saying that. But, according to actual documents which are released by Bain Capital, their actual financial statements, Mitt Romney, one of his investments in Bain Capital that he makes money off of is Sensata Technologies.
That's current. You're talking about
he's
current.
Actually physically making money. He's making money off of these jobs being moved to China. And that's coming from Bain Capital. That's not something that somebody else is saying. That's actually coming from their financial statements.
So you are, but you're telling me finally that people out there really seem to be having a change of mind when they finally realize what's really going on about, Is there a place where people could go, let's say online, to help support you?
Yeah. Okay. First thing we would like people to do is if they want to follow what we're doing here, you can go to www.bainport, BAINPORT.com.
Okay.
And we're downloading pictures of what we're doing here every day, and they can see what we're doing. They can also go to our Facebook page, which is Save Our Jobs. Or our Twitter account, which is Save Sensata Jobs. And, we would urge people, mainly here is to think about their own situation. Because if their job does not require that they be in a specific place and that they have face-to-face contact with whoever they're selling stuff to or making stuff for, that could happen to them, just as easily as it's happened to us.
So it's Bainport, BAINPORT.
PORT. Right. We took the name Freeport and cut free off and replaced it with Bain.
Bainport.com, right?
Yep.
Okay. And now you're camping out. Are you having any trouble with the local authorities there?
No, actually, the only thing that's really the city here has been behind us 100%. The mayor, the city council, the county fair board that owns the property that we're staying on has been nothing but wonderful. The security over across the street at the plant, they beefed it up and hired extra security guards. So we like to say we're the job creators in this situation because they've had to hire more security to come and watch what we're doing.
Well, so you helped create some jobs. You should be proud of yourself.
Yes, we did.
And they're probably not very well-paying jobs, but
no, but there's still some jobs. And we would urge everybody, if you're coming through Freeport, Illinois, you don't have to camp out with us. Just stop by. We have food for everybody that stops by, and it's becoming like a big family here. we sit around the fire pit and, just bond together, people who are facing the same things. And, we're doing all kinds of fun things. So if people can get here and can come out and show their support for America, not just for us, but for America, because, we're also looking at the future. We've got people here who bring their children here, and it's like we're doing this for those children because they need jobs too, and our community is on the line, and not just ours, but the entire country. These manufacturing communities that are based around manufacturing, their futures are on the line because these people are going to just pick up and move jobs.
Oh yeah, sure.
And just ship them out. Unless we. And the thing is, we would also urge people to go and make sure they're registered to vote because this is a really important election coming up.
Speaking of which, is your congressperson up for a vote?
Actually, it's kind of weird because we're currently represented by a guy by the name of Don Manzullo, who is actually. His district was redistricted because of the census, so we will no longer be in his district. He lost in the primary to a Tea Party guy, and so he basically has been of no help whatsoever. The person who is taking over the district we're now going to be in is a guy by the name of Bobby Schilling, who's another one of these Tea Party guys, who pretended like he was supporting us, but then when the Bring Jobs Home Act was in front of Congress, which really was just a starter to eliminate the tax incentives that these guys get for moving jobs overseas, he, of course, voted against it. So, we have gotten absolutely no help from the Republicans in this area.
Well, here's a job you may want to consider. There will be an opening in a couple of years for Congress, right?
Yeah.
And why not? Why not?
Yeah, because that's what we need to do is we need to get people in Congress who want to make a difference for working people, and middle-class people, and not the middle-class people that Mitt Romney was talking about yesterday who make $250,000 a year.
That's not middle class. No, that's not middle class.
I was thinking about it last night when I was working that the entire shift that I work in the department I work in, we don't make $250,000 a year combined. And it's like, that's not middle class. We're middle class.
Well, Mitt Romney has no concept of what.
He really doesn't.
He's got a car elevator in one of his buildings.
Right.
I mean, what does he know?
Right, and if you need to go to school, just borrow the money from your dad, or if you want to start a business, just go borrow the money from your dad.
Yeah, build it yourself.
Yeah, it's like.
All right, listen, I got.
Yeah, they don't have a comprehension at all of what it's really like to worry about how your mortgage gets paid, and how you buy food, and how you pay your utilities, and how you survive. And we didn't want to be rich. We just had lives where we were trying to make a better future for our children and our grandchildren and our community, and just had it shot out from underneath us.
Well, that's
just for somebody's pure greed.
Well, that's the American way right now. I gotta move on and take a few calls.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Tom Gallrap, who is telling you his story out there. And again, it's Bain, B-A-I-N, Port, bainport.com. And you can check in and see what they're all doing there and maybe figure out a way you can help out. Thanks for being on, Tom.
Well, thank you for your interest, and thanks to everybody who has supported us. We've gotten a lot of support from everybody, and we really appreciate it. It's restored our faith in people.
Oh, good. All right, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Okay. We can take a couple of calls. Tony from Phoenix, you're on.
Yeah, I actually had a question for Tom, but I'm just curious, is Mitt Romney still in charge of Bain Capital?
No, he's not, but he's still receiving. It's a tricky thing. He's not in charge of Bain Capital, but he still actively receives income from various business interests, with certain baffles, involved in between.
Well, so do I, because I have a 401k, and I receive money through my 401k from, probably a couple thousand different companies. But
this is different. I'm not talking about a 401k. He specifically is receiving something like deferred interest payments or whatever, however they structure it, from several businesses. Like, for instance, from this business where Bain Capital is shipping the jobs overseas and closing down, the factory. He is receiving money from this company.
Today?
I'm sorry, what?
Is Mitt Romney personally making those decisions today?
No, but what's that got to do with anything? He's receiving money for.
What we're leading to there was that Mitt Romney is currently in charge of Bain Capital, and he is currently the one who's making these decisions. I feel for the guy.
No one said that. No. He said what?
Like he's the one.
Shut this guy off.
Sounds like he's the one who's making these decisions.
Dump the guy. Yeah, I can't stand talking to people that don't listen. Let's go to Will from Chicago. You're on.
Hi, Mike. I just want to say, first of all, you are a brilliant scholar and information provider. This is my third week listening to you, and I make every effort not to miss you.
Well, I appreciate it.
I just want to make a comment in regards to the lady that called previously, and it just amazes me that, and I'm sure she's probably working class, that she actually is so ill-informed and such a non-critical thinker that she could actually believe that the president has something to do with the jobs going overseas to China. And it's been evident that several people, not only the gentleman that just called who worked under Bain and lost his job, that these people, hundreds of thousands, I'm sure, have bear witness to the fact that under Bain that their jobs were lost and they went overseas. And I think it's going to be it's already really a sad day when you have so many people like her who are actually working class, who don't think critically and call themselves Republicans and don't actually realize that many of the Republicans, and I'm not going to say all because obviously I don't know all of them, but many of them do not even have any type of compassion for working class or poor people. They only care about profit.
But I think you're making a really, really interesting point. There are millions of people like the lady who called who are going to vote for Mitt Romney. And when you ask them this in the simplest possible way, using simple words to explain why the president is responsible for something bad or Mr. Romney is responsible for something good, they can't answer you because they're really not very educated. And as you say, they don't think critically. But the essential point is this, and this is what you said. You said she believes the president has something to do with it. The magic word there is believe. In other words, she's operating entirely on a kind of mythological sort of faith, like a religious faith, based on people who tell her things, rather than using her own mind to make a decision. And actually, that is very much the hallmark of a lot of Republican voters. They are voting against their own interests. They're voting for their own extinction and not even knowing it.
And Mike, if I may say one more thing. The sad part is these people allow Fox to do their critical thinking for them, which is actually no critical thinking at all. Fox is so biased. But these people are going to realize if Romney does get in there, they think it's bad for them right now. Wait until he gets in there. They'll really see what a recession is all about. At least, if I may say this, at least Obama has compassion, which is, to me, pretty evident in his demeanor. Romney, in every fiber of his body and every time he even opens his mouth, he doesn't even know the word compassion exists for working class and poor people. And
I have to agree with you. I believe that whoever built him from whatever planet, and installed him on Earth left that part out because they didn't understand it themselves.
It's evident. If you only had 2 brain cells, you can see what this guy is all about.
Well, you're talking about one brain cell more than most of these people. What you're describing is somebody once called me a couple of years ago and put it better than anybody I ever heard. It's basically like a lot of chickens voting for Colonel Sanders. You know what I mean? And I never heard it put better. And unfortunately, these aren't chickens. These are grown human beings who actually go and vote, and it's a sad thing. They are, like you said, they're receiving their information. They are receiving their information and their education from Fox News, which is as dumbed down and dishonest as you could possibly get, and it's a sad thing. I got to move on, take some more calls.
All right, God bless you.
Yeah, you too. Let's go to, well, bless you anyhow. I don't know about to bring God into it. Tom from L.A., you're on.
Hi, sir. I just wanted to comment on the lady viewer that didn't understand how the Republican Party had anything to do with, American jobs going overseas.
Mm-hmm.
Where I'm from a liberal state, and every so often we come across a lot of, staunch Republicans, from Orange County and whatnot. And when you ask them about, the money, how the money that the Republicans are taking out of your pocket by making, huge profits by sending jobs overseas, affects them, they won't admit to it. The only thing they hang on to is this moral conservatism about, gays not marrying and,
Oh yeah, well, there's two things involved here. One is, and basically, what the Republicans, the people who run the Republican Party, and Fox News, which is basically a kind of subsidiary of the Republican Party, almost wholly owned. The people who run this organization called, ScrewYou.com or whatever it's called, they understand that people are, not thinking critically, then to get the information from the wrong place. They don't get it, and they understand this, that as long as they put in the stew that they're trying to serve up to people, put the right amount of abortion spice and gay marriage spice and homosexual spice and Muslim spice, if they throw enough of that junk into the stew, people will eat shit. They know that. They know it,
Oh, I believe it. Yeah. I lived in Louisiana for about 4 years, and down there, it was really a race that decided your politics.
Mm-hmm.
If you're white, you voted Republican. If you're black, you voted Democrat.
Right.
And there wasn't any discussion about it. Most of my friends there were white,
mm-hmm.
and I'm a Democrat, and I'd be like, hey, why are you guys voting Republican? It doesn't really suit you. You make under $30,000 a year.
So what's their answer?
Well, I can't say it on the air, but
yeah, you can. No, you can say it.
They're like, they don't vote for niggers. They don't do it.
There's the answer.
They will not do it.
There's the answer. We had a guy on here from Christian Dorsey, who's a guy from a place called the Economic Policy Institute. He's black, and I asked him, he's a super educated guy, right? Studied all these things all his life. I said, why do you think a lot of people, even though they're voting against their own interests, are going to vote against the Barack Obama? And he said, because he's black and he has a funny name. That's it. That's it.
I believe it. I always think back to that movie Mississippi Burning with Gene Hackman.
Yeah, great movie.
Yeah, in the movie he tells his partner a story of his youth about how poor they were as white Southerners,
mm-hmm.
and the end of it was that his father attacked the neighbor simply because he was black and doing better than him.
Mm-hmm.
And he tells his son, if you're not doing better than a black, then what are you better than?
Well, it's a shame that's left over after how many generations?
Millions and millions and millions of people vote like that in the South.
It's not just the South. It's not just the South, though. It's and people like that in Maine and New Hampshire and the Midwest and Kansas. Look at Kansas. Kansas is a place where the Secretary of State, who's a Republican appointee, a Tea Party lunatic and an idiot, he's a Republican, right? He's the head of the elections board, right? And he and two other people on the elections board, all Republican appointees, all Tea Partiers, tried to throw President Obama off the ballot in Kansas as a presidential candidate because some right-wing idiot, brought a petition, as a citizen can, to the board, the Republican board, saying that only somebody who's an American citizen, whose parents, somebody who's born in this country whose parents are American citizens. In other words, they questioned his birth certificate. They were literally, the Secretary of State of Ohio, in charge of elections, was going to throw off the president from the ballot. This is the kind of people you're dealing with. Tom, I got to move on. Take another call.
Yes. Hey, thank you for your time.
All right. Can you imagine? Finally, they gave up. They were so humiliated by it. They looked so stupid. And so many people threatened and complained about this, even in Kansas, which is as crazy as you can get. Believe me, Dorothy was better off in Oz than she was in Kansas. That they withdrew their stupid, consideration of removing Barack Obama from the ballot. Let's go to Pete in Connecticut. You're on. Pete, you there? Did you get shipped to China? Pete's not there. Wayne from North Carolina, you're on.
Yes, hello.
Hey.
I just want to say one thing. If Mitt Romney is allowed to be president of the United States, we will be at war. We will have World War III within 6 months. He doesn't know how to communicate, and foreign relations, you can just wipe that out, and it would be very dangerous to our country if Mitt Romney is allowed to be president of the United States, because we would be at war within 6 months after his election. Sir.
Well, he makes it pretty clear that he would invade and bomb Iran if he got elected. And that will set off World War III.
Exactly, because all the countries now are in position just waiting for an excuse to have a war.
Mm-hmm.
And if Barack Obama, he's a peacemaker, and he's a rational.
Yeah, Barack Obama is not so peaceful, believe me. I mean, tell the thousands of people who got blown up by drones how peaceful he is.
Well,
but he's not Mitt Romney. I'll go with you on that.
Yeah.
All right. Let's go to Mike in Indiana. You're on, Mike.
Hey, how you doing?
Hey.
Hey, I'm what you call a recovering Republican.
Yeah.
Up until
where's the program? Is it like a 28-day program?
It's actually kind of a lifelong program.
Okay.
I don't ever want to go back to it. But for 26 years, I voted solid Republican the whole way through, up until the 2010 elections. And when the Tea Party crazies got in there, it really caused me to really sit back and critically analyze all the positions, all the stances, everything from domestic policy to foreign policy. And once I started to analyze it critically and started to see through some of the vitriol and the rhetoric and, just the lies, it really opened my eyes quite a bit. And I'm in Indiana, obviously. I'm just, right here in, little edge of the Bible Belt.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that really ticked me off with them, when they started going after cutting every program out there just so that a few people could have some extra dollars. Our governor, Mitch Daniels, who was going to, was actually somebody who they thought would run in the Republican primary, he actually cut 2,000 kids and adults off the Medicaid waiver program just so that he could say that he had a surplus. And,
so in other words, just so he could say that, people probably died.
Oh, I'm sure. And I'm the parent of a special needs child, and which is one reason why I was actually on board with McCain Palin.
Mm-hmm.
When she first came out, we figured, hey, this is somebody who's one of us. But then she wouldn't shut up, and she kept opening her mouth, and we realized how much of an idiot she was.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But really, what it really comes down to is actually looking at all the different policies. It's like it really comes down to the people who tout the golden rule, who will throw the Bible in your face, who say that you must vote Republican if you want to keep this certain type of nation and all that.
Right.
They kind of missed out on the golden rule about treating others as you would want them to treat you.
Mm-hmm. Which is sort of the basic foundation premise of the whole deal.
Well, and that it's just not on a religious basis. It's just being a human being.
Mm-hmm.
And then I look back and I started actually going back to all the elections and all the the local politicians, state and as well as federal level, of the people I voted for, and it was one of those things where you just kind of like sick to your stomach. I guess it's I guess it's part of that 28-day program where you have to do a certain amount of penance to understand where your faults were.
Let me ask you a couple of questions. So, what kind of work do you do?
I'm an attorney, actually.
Okay, and so when you say you have a special needs kid, now I don't want to ask you private information, but
oh yeah, go ahead.
All right, so are we dealing with autism here or what?
Yes.
Okay, so does he have to go to a special school?
Yes, he does, and insurance pays a little bit of it. They have the insurance has consistently raised rates anywhere between, and I calculate out to, and the smallest amount they raised annually was 82%, and the highest amount was 99%.
What, per year?
Per year.
For what? For the policy?
Yes.
Do you pay your own policy?
Yes.
That must be really something. I mean, to pay an individual policy.
Well, and it's kind of funny because people look at me and say, "Wow, you're an attorney. You must make lots of money." And it's like, well, no. You see this little piece of crap Dodge Caliber I drive? It's because 70% of my income goes towards policy plus out-of-pocket expenses.
So you pay. So you're paying for your own health insurance. And does your child go to a special school?
Yes, he does.
Okay, and does he need any special other attention besides the school?
We do have some outside therapy, but he actually we're lucky enough that the therapy center that he's in is very good, and we work hand in hand with the programs that he has during the day, and we implement the same types of therapy
at home,
if you will, at home.
So the school
we keep it pretty seamless.
The school he goes to, do you pay out of pocket for that?
I pay probably about 25% out of pocket.
And where does the rest of the money come from?
The rest of the money is from the insurance policy, and he has a policy just for him.
I see.
Indiana is one of those states. We call it an autism mandate state, which means that an insurance company cannot deny coverage or cancel coverage based solely on the autism diagnosis.
Well, that's pretty enlightened, you know.
Well, here's the dirty little secret.
Yeah.
And is that I've seen, and I do a lot of advocacy for the parents and groups. But what I've seen is that the insurance companies will come in and cancel a policy, but they will actually put it off on another person on the policy, saying we're not canceling the policy because of the kiddo on autism. We're canceling it because this other person who is
oh yeah, you got a high function on your liver test or something, right?
Yeah,
I know.
So we actually have a separate policy just for him, so it takes away that it's basically a pretext that they cannot use anymore.
But the situation would be, and I think going back to Recovering Republican. By the way, you might want to sponsor someone else sometime.
I'm actually sponsoring 4 other friends.
Okay, now so if you're Recovering Republicans don't allow Recovering Republicans to vote Romney. So if you want a sponsor, you might want to get in touch with this guy. But but the thing is that there are probably people in your state there whose kids have autism who don't make enough money to pay for a special school. Or if they send them to a special school, they're going to need government help. And if they're going to get it cut, they can't. And then what happens to them?
Then they're back at the mercy of the public schools, which is really abysmal. You have in Indiana, 1 out of 96 kids in the public schools is on an IEP for autism. You know, that's a lot of kids, and and a lot of the times too is, I mean, you're not going to get anything than the bare minimum from the schools, and that's if you're lucky.
Well, here's what it all comes down to. I mean, it's the same thing we've been talking about all night long. It's what we talk about every week for years on end. Either you understand the basic fact that there are other people in the world, they help you, you help them, because what are we here for? Or it's fuck them. It's one of the two. And the two parties, are now, I'm not such a big fan of the Democratic Party. In fact, next week, my guest at 6 p.m. Is going to be Jill Stein, who's running as a Green Party candidate. And I've made a big deal about it. I'm sure I'm going to lose half my listeners if Obama loses because they're angry at me about this.
I've become a big Bernie Sanders fan, actually. So it's,
Bernie Sanders, oh yeah, well, he's the only real independent. And you know what? Yeah, we never took a break, and I'm getting. My engineer's jumping up and down, which is pretty funny to watch, all things considered, at his age. So I gotta take a break. I gotta take a break. All right. So listen, this you might be able to start your own small business, and you could say you built it, which is the. Well, listen, I'm serious now. I'm giving you this free idea. You don't have to give me any money. You could try to figure out a website and everything, recoveringrepublicans.org or whatever. And it's a way of sponsoring people just based on AA principles. And you can make up the principles. We could work together on it. Send me an email. We'll work it out.
And I think somebody probably listening to you has already registered the domain name in these last 10 seconds.
See, that's the problem with being on the radio. All right, thanks.
All right, thanks.
Okay, bye. Let's go to a break, and somebody can sell you something.
Sirius XM Left.
There's a lot of reasons people should just sort of let go of the American dream.
The political revolution is being broadcast. Sirius XM Left 127.
Yeah, you want Sirius XM Left 127. It's like Paul Winchell. Walter Winchell. We have another call here, but I guess I was going to talk about this insanity that's going on all over the world, the Middle East. But, it's almost too stupid to talk about, but I guess you do have to talk about it. But I think it's going to blow over. My prediction is it's all going to blow over by next week. I mean, what you had is basically a couple of insane religious fundamentalists, apparently some right-wing Coptic Christians who are Egyptians who are Christians, and they're in a very brutalized minority over in Egypt. They lived a kind of an on-the-edge life. The hundreds of thousands of Christians over in Egypt in a very severely Muslim country. And they got along there. They've been there for 1,500 years? Basically, it was when the Greeks ran the place, and they were Christians. And so they are Egyptians, but they're Christians. And they live on the sort of in society, and they sort of got along over there. But after Mubarak was overthrown and freedom and democracy came to Egypt, and the Muslim Brotherhood got in charge, there's been a lot of burning of churches and a lot of terrorizing. So there's groups over here of Coptic Christians in this country, and some of the right-wing fringe people on the Coptic Christians. The main producer of this crazy 13-minute, incredibly insulting, nutty, stupid, laughably funny, badly acted video that is driving everybody crazy, fringe people all over the world, is a Coptic Christian. He financed it. I forget his name. His name is actually online. You can check it out. AP and other people have done the research. And then the other guy who's in charge of this film, who actually publicized it, between these two guys, a Coptic Christian put up the money, and the other guy is a fundamentalist Christian lunatic who has an anti-Muslim website named Steve Klein. And he's a fundamentalist jerk, Christian out in California. These two guys put this ridiculously stupid, vicious, vile, offensive film together and put subtitles on it, shipped it overseas, knowing very well what was going to happen. And free speech, right? Free speech. Important thing to remember in all of this, and there's a million things you could talk about this, right? The important thing to remember so far, and I say so far because you don't know what's going to happen as each day goes by, you see in Egypt and you see in Benghazi and Libya where they killed the American ambassador and 3 other people, you see in all these different cities, in Sana'a, the capital of Yemen, and in Tunis and all these other places, it routinely says that hundreds of demonstrators were on the streets or hundreds of demonstrators attacked the embassies. This is important. It's important. And the reason for that is that millions of people live in these places. Millions of Muslims live in these places. And when you see hundreds and hundreds of people out of millions of Muslims, that means it's a lunatic fringe. And you're talking it's always the same thing. You're talking about men in their 20s who are unemployed, probably a little stupid, because if they're very, very fundamentalist religious, it equals stupidity. They're not very bright. Talk about lack of critical thinking. So you're talking about essentially stupid people who have no jobs, and also in a fundamentalist religion, and that goes for Christianity and Judaism as well, in the fundamentalist wing of their particular religion, where they don't have any sex with women, because they have to get married first before they have sex. So you got guys who are teenagers and in their 20s, filled with hormones, brought up by twisted old men to hate everybody who's not like they are, who are a little dim in their bulbs because they believe this insanity in the first place. And you're only talking about hundreds of people. If it was really seriously the whole population, and I'm not defending any particular group of people, but if you're talking about a whole population hating the United States and trying to burn down embassies, you would have hundreds of thousands of people doing this. So bear that in mind. You're only talking about fringe group, and it's a perfect mirror for the fringe assholes who produce this thing in this country. And then what drives me crazy, and which makes me feel really upset and bad about it, is what's the first thing that these cowardly fucking lunatic fundamentalist Christians who produced this thing in the first place, what did they do? They told the newspapers that it was a Jewish man with 100 Jewish donors. Blame it on the Jews, right? Blame it on the Jews. This has been going on for, 1,500 years? 1,500 years that people have been murdering Jews, torturing Jews, making them convert, and wind up with the Holocaust, right? Blaming on... So no Jew that anybody knows of was involved in this, unless one of the idiot actors with their fake beards and their stupid American accents was involved in this. And this is a deliberate provocation. They knew people were probably going to get killed over this, and they enjoy it. Like this moron pastor, if that's what you could actually define him as, Terry Gaines, down in Florida, who is burning Korans. He's one of the supporters of this movie. Turns out half the actors in this movie that they made, which is not a movie, it's a trailer, are porn actors. They're porn, and I think the director was a director of porn movies. Not only that, the Coptic Christian right-wing idiot who financed this thing just got out of serving 2 years in jail for fraud. I think it was credit card fraud. So these are the people who put this together. But the rest of the world doesn't see that. They just see it coming from America. So they're stupid. They're uneducated over there. They're religious, which makes them a little stupid, to begin with, as far as I'm concerned. I have a very bad attitude towards organized religion. They have nothing to do. They don't get sex. They're out on the street. They have no jobs. Why not? And then under cover of these people, probably it's a great way for organized, insurgent groups or Al-Qaeda or people like that to do what they did, to send a rocket-propelled grenade or some form of rocket into the embassy at Benghazi or into a car where the ambassador was, to kill them. So it's a perfect smokescreen for this. So that's something to remember. But you don't get the major media, who I hold responsible for some of these deaths over there. You don't get the major media like NBC, CBS, and all these other places, even MSNBC or Fox News. All you hear from them and see from them are live pictures of flaming things being thrown, rocks being thrown in the street, demonstrators. You never hear from these sons of bitches who are accomplices to murder in this case. You never hear from them about the fact that there's only hundreds of people involved, not thousands of people, because it makes better news and it makes better visuals if you describe giant mobs and out-of-control people doing this. Last thing I want to say about this is, religious fundamentalists don't understand the concept of free speech. Christian religious fundamentalists, Jewish religious fundamentalists, and Muslim religious fundamentalists, they don't get free speech because they're children. They're babies. They're throwing a temper tantrum, and they're stupid. They don't understand that what a mature person understands, and hopefully mature Americans should understand, that you can criticize anything you want, and other people can criticize anything they want about you. You don't have to kill people over it. That's what makes people grown-ups. So you're dealing with children here, only they're capable of killing people. So that's what's going on. That's a brief summary. You heard it here first, and probably last. Anyhow, we'll monitor this as it goes on. And next week we're going to talk to Jill Stein, who may have as many as 2 million people voting for her. You can hate me for it, and I'll talk to you about that next week. I'll get some calls from people, see what you think about that. And we're also going to talk about Iran, Israel, and the U.S. next week for somebody who's an expert on the whole area. Lots of interesting stuff. Check out Fader Files, FEDERFILES.com, and from there you can go anywhere. I guess that's it.